I don't remember the last time I felt so alone. The radio crackled faintly in the cab of my cruiser, barely audible over the hammering rain. The kind of rain that doesn't just fall. It drives itself into your skin, into your bones, as though the world itself is trying to push you back inside. And tonight, it felt like it was trying to push me off the road entirely. Dispatch had sounded almost casual. Stranded car, Highway 37, mile marker 12. Nothing about the wind slicing the treetops like knives. Nothing about the slick black ribbon of asphalt that reflected the headlights in the same way a mirror might if it wanted to drown you. Just a call, routine, simple, except it wasn't. It never is. Not in the middle of a storm like this. The first thing I noticed when I pulled off the highway wasn't the car. It was the stillness of the air, the unnatural pause and sound of rain, with just a heartbeat around the roadside. It's hard to explain, but it was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. My tires hissed against the wet pavement, and I could feel the car struggling to grip, slipping sideways slightly before correcting. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, eyes scanning, mind spinning through every possibility. The stranded car sat under a sickly halo of my headlights. Just ahead, nothing more than a dark sedan, but slightly crumpled like someone had slammed it in a panic. But then on the edge of my vision, I saw something move, or maybe I didn't. A figure, just standing there, motionless at the roadside. Rain plastered their hair to their head, clothes soaked dark, indistinguishable from the night itself. I squinted. My pulse jumped. They didn't step forward or wave, didn't even appear to breathe, just waited. I reached for the radio. Dispatch, Unit 7. I've got eyes on. My voice cut off. The figure didn't belong. I didn't know it. I hadn't met them, but I knew. Something about their presence wasn't right. The air around them seemed heavier. The rain slid off them in perfect sheets, as if it avoided them deliberately. My hand hovered over the door handle, unwilling to move, unwilling to retreat. I tried to shake it off. Probably someone stranded, soaked, panicked. I've been on this road for years. I've pulled dozens of drivers out of ditches, helped lost teenagers, couples who had no business being out past sunset. But this didn't feel like that. I stepped out. The rain hit me like a wall. It stung my face. My jacket clung wetly to my chest. I squinted, searching for the figure. A step closer, and my boot sank slightly into the shoulder mud. I could see footprint behind me, freshly pressed, leading from the road's edge to the trees. But there were no other tracks near the figure. None. Hello? My voice sounded foreign. Swallowed almost entirely by the storm. The figure tilted its head. Just a tilt. And then it smiled. Not a smile you can call human. Not a warm, reassuring smile. Something sharp, hollow, as if it had been carved from the absence of light. I swallowed. My throat felt tight. I forced my legs to move forward. The figure didn't flinch, didn't move, just stayed, anchored to that roadside, as though it had been waiting centuries for someone to notice. I reached the car finally. Empty. Keys in the ignition. Engine still warm, no one inside. No sign of struggle. Nothing. My mind began racing. I stepped back to the figure, instinctively, hoping to catch a glimpse of a person who might have fled into the woods. But it was gone. The roadside was empty. Just the rain, the road, and the dark forest leaning in close. Then the headlights flicked on. Not mine. Behind me. Another car had pulled over silently. The engine was running. Headlights aimed straight at me. I turned. Empty again. No vehicle. Nothing. And yet, the light was real. I could see the rain illuminated in those beams. I could see myself staring back in disbelief. I backed up. My mind screamed to retreat, to run back to my cruiser, to leave the stretch of road and never look back. But a voice, faint and impossibly close, whispered at my ear. Not out loud, not in the rain, inside. Words I couldn't make sense of at first. You're too late. The hair on my neck rose. Goose flesh prickled my arms. I spun, searching for source. Nothing. Just the road, the car, the dark. And yet, a figure was there again. Same place. Same impossible stillness. And now, I noticed it. its reflection in the rear-view mirror of the abandoned sedan. Except it didn't appear anywhere else. Not in my mirrors, not on the wet asphalt. Only there, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. I stepped forward, closer to the car, trying to convince myself this was some prank, some townie laughing in the rain. But there was no way. The figure, the presence, it wasn't physical in the way the world obeys. It was heavier than air, darker than shadow, waiting for something I couldn't yet name. I leaned over to look inside the sedan again. Empty. Nothing inside but the faint smell of wet leather and cold metal. Then I noticed something new. Fingerprints smeared across the glass. Not recent, but not old either. Just there, pressed as if someone or something had pressed their hand against the window and vanished into the night. A clap of thunder shook the trees. I jumped, heart slamming against my chest, and the figure stepped closer, not with legs, but as though it shifted through the space itself. One moment on the shoulder, the next nearer to the road. Closer. Impossible. I raised my flashlight. Beam cut through the rain, caught on something. Just the edge of a face, pale and wet, grinning without a sound. I stumbled back, shouted. My voice broke. Hey! Who, what? Nothing answered. No movement. No sound. Only the storm and the rain, and a heavy, suffocating presence. My cruiser. I ran for it, slipping in mud, nearly losing my footing, heart hammering, adrenaline drowning rational thought. I slid inside, slammed the door, locked it, engine turned over reluctantly, like it too had been watching. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to catch a glimpse of what followed. But there was nothing. For a moment, the headlights of my cruiser reflected in the rain-soaked pavement, and in the shimmer, I thought I saw the figure, standing in the middle of the road, waiting, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. I hit the accelerator. Tires screamed, rain sprayed. I didn't dare look back. I radioed dispatch, voice shaking. Unit 7, I'm clear. I'm on the move. No one. I don't see anyone. Static crackled back, calm as if nothing were happening. Copy Unit 7. Continue on route. Weather is heavy. Heavy. They said heavy. Not dangerous. Not unusual. Just heavy. Like they couldn't see. Like they wouldn't know. I drove the rest of the storm in silence. Eyes glued to the dark ribbon ahead. Heart refusing to settle. Every shadow became something else. Every reflection in the wet road. Every shimmer on the metal guardrails hinted at movement. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. Lights, signs, the quiet hum of civilization. And yet, even there in the diner where I stopped to warm up, I couldn't shake it. The feeling that someone had marked me, that the figure wasn't gone, that the road, the rain, the shadows themselves remembered me. I patrolled this county for over 15 years. Seen deaths, accidents, tragedies. But tonight, I felt something different. Something patient. Something that didn't need eyes to see me. Something that didn't belong anywhere. Yet it had found me. I don't know if I'll ever go back to that stretch of Highway 37. I don't know if I'll ever know what I saw, or if I ever want to. I only know this. The storm, the rain, the shadow on the roadside, it's still waiting. And I can feel it. Even now, hours later, as I sit in my office, listening to the rain hammer against the window, I know it's out there, waiting for the next call, the next cruiser, the next person stupid enough to step into its road. And I know somehow I was late. I didn't believe it at first. I thought I was tired, thought the long hours, the storm from last night, and the endless paperwork had finally caught up with me. But when I started going through the census updates and the police reports, I realized I wasn't imagining things. The town looked normal on the surface. Streets neatly laid out, streetlights functioning, mailboxes with the occasional faded nameplate. Even the old gas station on the corner still worked, though barely. But the records told a different story. Names kept appearing that didn't belong. Names that shouldn't exist. I first noticed it while reviewing the latest police call logs. Calls for disturbances, petty thefts, and sometimes worse. But some entries had no corresponding people. Empty addresses. No one had ever lived there, or at least no one we could find. One example haunted me for days. A man named Henry Caldwell, 42, reported missing by his neighbor. I checked the address. Nothing. The house didn't exist. The street ended in a cul-de-sac that wasn't on any map. Yet, the report had been filed with officer signatures, timestamps, and everything official looking. I thought it might be a clerical error. Then came the census forms. They arrived every month, printed on thin, yellow paper like old library pages. And every month, more names appeared, residents of the town that weren't real. Children, adults, even elderly couples. Some had detailed backgrounds, schools attended, jobs, marital statuses. All precise, all documented. Yet, when I went to the addresses, the houses were empty, abandoned decades ago, or had been demolished entirely. I told myself there must be an explanation, maybe some sort of bureaucratic mistake, maybe a prank, someone messing with the system. But that theory fell apart the moment I opened the police reports that listed those same names. Calls for medical emergencies, domestic disputes, even arrests. Every report marked official, signed, filed, and cross-referenced with forms that included Social Security numbers. Social Security numbers assigned to people who didn't exist. And that's when I started seeing them in town. Not physically, at least not at first. I'd drive down the streets, checking addresses, looking for discrepancies, and I would see shadows in windows. Figures moving behind curtains where no one should have lived for years. Sometimes I would stop, heart thudding, and the movement would vanish. No footprints, no doors open, nothing. I remember the first night, I really felt it. I was alone in the office, rain tapping against the windows, fluorescent lights humming softly above. I started cross-referencing census data with old property records, trying to reconcile years of missing residents. Then I noticed it. One particular name kept appearing month after month in both census forms and police reports. Evelyn Marks, age 33, address 14 Oakwood Lane. Oakwood Lane was nothing but a collapsed row of buildings, reduced to rubble long before I'd ever been assigned here. I went there the next morning, boots sinking into mud and debris. Nothing moved, no footprints, no sign of habitation, just broken walls and shattered windows. Yet, my paperwork insisted she existed. My police reports insisted she existed. And in the corner of my eye, I swore I saw a shadow duck behind what remained of the chimney. I began to fear my own mind. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the stress of being the town's last real record keeper, the one who had to reconcile its history while listening to the rain night after night, was breaking me. But then the forms started coming with new details I hadn't entered, details I hadn't even known. On one form, Evelyn Mark's occupation was listed as a school teacher at a school that had burned down 40 years ago. Next to it, the form included a note, "She will be here when you arrive." I slammed the folder shut, heart hammering. I forced myself to breathe. Logical explanations. I told myself, someone had to be messing with the system. But when I checked my security logs that evening, the time-stamped entries showed movement inside the office, my office. Despite the fact that I hadn't left the building, the cameras showed nothing except the dim glow of the monitors. And yet, in the footage, there was something, a flicker, a shadow that bent the light in ways it shouldn't. I didn't sleep that night. The rain fell like knives against the roof, relentless, drowning out every other sound. I kept hearing whispers through the vents. Names, mostly. Names from the census forms. Names I had just read, and yet they sounded alive. Breathing, calling out soft, low. I tried to tell myself it was the wind. It wasn't the wind. The next day, I had to drive to 14 Oakwood Lane again. Something compelled me. I parked my cruiser at the end of the street and walked carefully, boots squelching in the mud. Broken homes leaned on one another, sagging as if trying to hold up what little remained. I reached the site that should have been Evelyn Mark's house. Collapsed, nothing, and yet the air was warmer here, not in a comfortable way, but like the walls themselves exhaled, like the earth remembered someone was meant to be here. Then I heard it, a soft creak, footsteps. Behind me, I spun. Nothing. The street was empty. The sky gray, rain still falling, but the sound persisted, rhythmic, deliberate, as if someone walked in sync with me. I forced my gaze to the remaining walls, to the gaps where doors had once been, and for a brief, impossible moment, I saw her, Evelyn Marks, standing in a doorway that no longer existed, motionless, watching. Her eyes were hollow, not empty exactly, but like they carried a weight of years I could never have measured. And she smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't invite comfort, only awareness. Awareness that she and every name I had seen on those forms existed somewhere else, somewhere I could not reach. I ran. Not fast, not shouting, just ran. My mind pounding, adrenaline coursing, rain slapping against my face. When I reached my cruiser, I glanced back once. No one there, but in my rear-view mirror, faintly, I thought I saw a figure stand at the ends of other collapsed homes. One by one, shadows made from memory and mist. Back in the office, I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, hallucinations, stress. Maybe, but the forms didn't lie. The police reports didn't lie. Every time I checked, more names appeared. A woman with a baby that didn't exist. A man who supposedly owned a farm that had been sold to the county decades ago. A boy who should have been in school last year, according to age, but his birth certificate was postmarked 1923. And they were all here. Not here exactly, but near. Present in the paperwork. Present in the air. Present in the town that wasn't supposed to exist the way it did. I started seeing them everywhere. Driving past the empty diner on Main Street, I glimpsed a man at the counter, black hat pulled low, walking past the old library. I'd see a woman in a blue coat turning the pages of a book that wasn't there. They didn't speak. They didn't move naturally, but their presence pressed into me, weighted the air, made my skin crawl. I began documenting every anomaly, every name, every sighting, every sound that shouldn't exist, every shadow that bent light wrong. And in the margins of my notes, I started writing questions I didn't want answers to. Why? How? Are they trapped? Are we trapped? I know now that this town exists in layers. One layer we see, another layer we only feel, a layer that holds its residents in some in-between state, where records persist even when reality refuses them. I've started calling it the shadow census. Names without bodies, people without air, memories without life. And I fear that anyone who tries to investigate too closely might start appearing there too, listed in the forms, recorded in reports, noted in a ledger somewhere between the living and the gone. I check the forms each day. Each day, more names appear. Some of the old ones disappear, only to be replaced by new entries. Children who never existed, parents who were erased from every other record. And I know, deep down, that if I keep looking, if I keep cataloging, I will see my own name eventually. Sometimes at night, I drive past the streets. I don't go inside anymore. I just drive slowly, rain streaking my windshield, headlights cutting through the gray, and I see them, standing in doorways that no longer exist, or walking silently along streets that are empty, watching, waiting, smiling just enough to let you know that they know you can see them. I used to think a town was defined by the people living there, by the stories they left behind, by the lights and windows at night. But now I know the truth. A town is defined by what it keeps, by the names it refuses to let go, by the forms, the files, the reports, and the papers that say someone exists even when no one ever did. And I fear, more than anything, that someday the paperwork will say I exist too, that my name, my life, my hours spent watching will be filed neatly among them, that I will become a name without a body. Until then, I write, I record, I catalog, I drive through empty streets. I listen to the rain, and I watch the shadows. Because if I stop, if I turn away, who knows what will be allowed to vanish next? The forms say they're here. The reports say they're here. And I know now, with every step, every glance, every heartbeat, that they've always been, and they always will be. I started noticing them the first night I went out after sunset. I had convinced myself I was tired or stressed, or that the town itself was playing tricks on me. I had been cataloging census forms, police reports, and old property files for weeks. Names without bodies. People who should not exist. And now, when the sun went down, I began seeing something else. They stood in doorways, always at the edges of my vision. Motionless, unblinking, silent. Sometimes in houses that had been empty for decades. Sometimes behind a glass of windows I knew had been broken for years. The first one I saw was a man, tall, lean, wear what looked like a faded blue jacket. He didn't move. Not when I approached. Not when I looked away. Not even when a stray cat brushed past the threshold and hissed. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Rain on glass. Shadows bending in strange ways. But it wasn't. I walked closer, heart hammering. The street was empty. Not a single car, not a single other person. And yet, he remained there, perfectly still. The air around him seemed wrong. Heavy, almost viscous, like it resisted my presence. I realized, slowly, that I was holding my breath. That instinctive pause made me notice it. His chest did not rise or fall. He did not breathe. He didn't need to. I stumbled back. My hand hit the brick wall beside me, and I swore I could feel the heat radiating off him, faint, unnatural. He wasn't alive. He wasn't dead. He simply was. I ran. When I got home, I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and forced myself to eat. I tried to convince myself I had been imagining things. That exhaustion had made me see figures where there were none. But when I looked out the window again, across the street, I saw another, a young woman in a green dress, hair tied back in a bun, standing in the doorway of a house I knew had been abandoned for years. Motionless, watching. I could feel her eyes on me, though I couldn't see them clearly. And for the first time, I felt it, a weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe, making the room feel smaller. I started keeping notes, like I always did. I documented each figure I saw. Location, approximate height, clothing, position. Anything I could remember. The list grew faster than I expected. A man with a cane on Maple Street. A girl holding a doll on Cedar. An older woman sitting in the doorway of the old bakery. All motionless, all silent, all breathingless. By the third night, I was barely sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them in the corners of my vision. When I looked away, they moved closer. Not quickly, not in a normal way, but enough that I could swear the distance between us had shortened. I began to understand something else about them. They didn't move naturally. Their bodies didn't shift the way living people do, not even when wind blew their hair or clothes. They existed in a space between motion and stillness, a kind of suspended reality that made the air around them feel thicker, more resistant. They weren't human. Not exactly. I tried to speak to one. I walked up the girl on Cedar Street, holding the doll, and asked if she was okay. She didn't blink, didn't answer, didn't move at all. I touched the door frame to steady myself, and the air felt wrong again, as if I were pushing against something solid, something living in its own invisible space. I backed away slowly. That night, I slept with the lights on, but it didn't help. I could hear them outside my window, just faintly. The slight shuffling that isn't quite a step, the almost not their whisper of air moving against them. I know it sounds insane. I know it does, but it's true. The next day, I checked the census forms again. Names matched faces I'd seen. There was a boy named Thomas, listed as 10 years old, living on the corner of Elm and 3rd. When I went there that night, he was there, standing in the doorway, motionless, no sign of life, no blink, no breathing. The forms had told me he existed, and he did, but in a way that made my skin crawl. I started noticing patterns. They only appeared at night. They were always at thresholds, at the edges of the spaces where life once moved through. Front doors, broken windows, empty porches, and they were patient. They waited. They didn't wander. They didn't fidget. And they didn't speak. I stopped leaving the house at night. I told myself it was safer, but the presence followed me. I would glance out my window, and there they were, figures at the edge of the street, lined up like statues, just beyond reach, watching, waiting, and sometimes when the wind shifted or the rain intensified, I could swear they moved slightly, a subtle turn ahead, a faint step closer. I tried to explain it to someone, a friend, a colleague, but the moment I mentioned it, I realized the word sounded absurd. I sounded absurd. People who don't need air, I said out loud, and when I repeated it, it felt heavier, like the air itself was listening. I started hearing them in other ways. Not voices, exactly, not words, but a presence that made the room feel smaller, like the walls themselves were breathing, like the floor beneath me remembered them. I could feel their attention, their silent patience pressing against the edges of my mind. Sometimes when the street was empty and quiet, I would see movement that wasn't movement. A figure would shift just enough to remind me it was there. A blink of light in the darkness. A fold of clothing that hadn't been there before. And when I looked closer, they would vanish, leaving only the memory of presence. I began keeping a map of sightings. Every doorway, every street corner, every abandoned house, every figure. And every time I thought I had accounted for them all, new ones appeared. Not in the day, never in the day, only at night. Always patient, always waiting. The realization hit me slowly, creeping in the way cold does. They didn't belong to the world of living people. They didn't belong to the town. Exactly. They were echoes, shadows, traces of lives that had been erased or forgotten. And yet, they weren't fading. They were persistent, growing, filling the empty spaces. I tried to confront them directly once. I went to the old bakery, where an older woman stood in the doorway every night. I called her name, told her I knew she wasn't alive, asked what she wanted. She didn't move, didn't blink, but I swear the air thickened. The room seemed to hold its breath, and I felt it, the pressure, the weight of her presence. It was a warning, not a threat, not exactly, but a warning that I didn't belong here, and that I was being noticed. Since that night, I stopped going near the houses. I stopped walking the streets. I sit inside, watching from my windows, listening to the rain and the quiet hum of the night. And I count them, because if I don't count them, if I don't acknowledge their presence, I feel something else will take note, something worse. I don't know how many there are. I can't. They multiply, not in the way humans do, not with life. They appear wherever attention lingers, wherever the living have once tried to impose order. Empty streets, closed shops, collapsed homes. They fill the gaps, and they wait. I know now that they're patient, eternal. I am not, and sometimes in the dead of night, I wonder if one day I will join them, motionless, silent, standing in a doorway that shouldn't exist, watching, waiting, and maybe, when I do, someone else will come along and see me there, unblinking, not breathing, a shadow of life, a figure that defies natural law, waiting, because that is what this town does. It keeps its secrets, its echoes, its people who don't need air, and it waits for the next living soul to notice. And I fear more than anything that noticing is enough. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked back into the station that morning. The town seemed smaller, not physically, of course. The streets were the same, the buildings the same faded brick, the same cracked asphalt, but the space between them felt thinner, like air had been compressed, like something was pressing inward, just beyond my perception. The call came in just after breakfast. Another missing person report. A boy named Jared, 12 years old, last seen near the eastern fields. Simple enough. I made notes, prepared to drive out to the edge of town, the same route I'd taken a dozen times before. But then I checked the census list, as I always did before heading out, and froze. Jared's name was there, not as missing, not as unaccounted for, listed as living with his parents, right here in town, in the records, in the official documents. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the rain last night had unsettled me more than I thought. But then I scanned the rest of the list. The town's population was higher than it had ever been, by more than a dozen. Names I had never heard, faces I had never seen, and yet all official, all accounted for. I felt a cold sinking in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize you've been overlooking something so obvious it becomes impossible to ignore. I walked down the hall to my assistant. who was hunched over a stack of papers, scribbling notes. "You're seeing it too, right?" I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper. She looked up at me, expression blank. "See what?" I waved the census sheet. "These names, they don't exist. And yet they're here, living here, all official." She blinked, just once, and returned to her work. "We have procedures," she said. "We follow them." That's when I understood. This wasn't about procedure. This was about the town itself. I left the station and walked through the streets, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low, heavy with an oppressive gray. Streetlights reflected off the puddles in a way that made the empty streets seem alive, almost as if the shadows were moving independently of the light. And then I saw them, figures, just beyond the edge of the light, standing in doorways, on porches, in the windows of houses that had been abandoned for decades, motionless, silent, watching. I recognized some of them from the new census entries. Names and faces that weren't supposed to exist, now walking, or rather, appearing in my town. Their presence was subtle but unmistakable. A pressure in the air, a shift in gravity, the faint scent of something organic and old, like damp earth and decayed wood. I tried to approach one, a man in a gray coat, standing by the corner store. As I drew closer, the space between us seemed wrong. The air thickened, pressing against my chest. I stopped, heart hammering, and the figure didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, but I knew it was aware of me. I backed away. Over the next few days, the list grew, more names, more faces, and the sightings multiplied. People who didn't need air, people who didn't eat, sleep, or age, people who simply were. I started cross-referencing the reports. Missing persons, census data, police records, birth and death certificates. They didn't line up. They couldn't. And yet, somehow they did. Somehow, this town had absorbed them, incorporated them into its official fabric. And then I noticed a growth. The number wasn't static. It never had been. Every week, new names appeared. New figures stood in the shadows. I saw a man with a cane by the old church, a girl in a yellow dress on Pine Street, a woman sitting in the doorway of the library, all accounted for in the records, all unaccounted for in reality. I started to understand something I hadn't before. This wasn't a town with missing people. It was a town that had swallowed them, and it was still swallowing. I tried to explain it to the state authorities, to anyone who would listen, but the documents, the official papers, the numbers, they all told the same story. This was a thriving town, growing, even, and yet, walking its streets, I could feel the underlying wrongness, the unnatural pattern of existence that no law or record could capture. At night I patrolled. I made notes. I tried to track the movements of these figures, but they didn't move in conventional ways. They appeared, dissipated, reappeared, always on the edges of perception, and always growing in number. The streets were crowded in a way they hadn't been during the day. Not with cars, not with traffic, not with real people, but with the presence of those who didn't exist. The town had become layered, overlapping realities that sometimes brushed against each other. And in the brush, I felt the town reaching, spreading. One night, I walked past the eastern fields. The boy, Jared, was there, motionless, watching. I called his name. Nothing. I approached. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't react. And then I realized I didn't know if he had ever been alive. Maybe he was part of this accumulation, a ghost of the town's growth. I stumbled back. The grass felt thick underfoot, impossibly thick, like it resisted me. And when I looked up, more figures had appeared. Behind trees, near abandoned farmhouses, lining the horizon, all silent, all waiting. I began documenting the expansion. Every name, every sighting, every discrepancy between reality and record. And with each entry, I felt a creeping dread. The town wasn't just keeping secrets. It was alive, and it was feeding. By the end of the week, I understood the truth in a way that left me hollow. The population wasn't just inflated. It wasn't just ghost names on paper. It was something else entirely. Something growing. Something that used the framework of human existence to propagate. I started sleeping in the station, leaving the house empty, because I couldn't bear the feeling of them outside my window. The air in my home felt thin, oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards made me think they had multiplied in my absence. Every gust of wind made me fear that another had appeared. I kept a log, but the pages seemed insufficient. Words could not capture the presence, the density, the creeping inevitability. Each name added to the record was another thread in the town's web, another extension of its reach. And then I realized the town didn't just keep its people. It grew its people, absorbing what had existed, what had vanished, and shaping them into its own design. And the process never stopped, never slowed, never paused. I began to notice subtle differences in the figures. Some appeared partially transparent, others blurred at the edges, others sharper than life itself. Some even mimicked everyday behaviors, washing windows, adjusting curtains, sweeping porches, but never fully, just enough to unsettle, just enough to suggest that the town's grip extended into the ordinary, the mundane, the familiar. I knew then that leaving might be impossible. The town's population wasn't just a statistic. It was a presence, a force, and it had noticed me. The last night I patrolled, I walked Maple Street and counted 17 figures in motionless thresholds, 3 near the library, a man leaning against the post office, the girl in yellow still at Pine. And yet, when I checked the census, there were 33 new names I hadn't accounted for. They were growing faster than I could track, faster than I could rationalize, faster than I could comprehend. I returned to the station and reviewed the reports, the numbers, the names, the sightings. It was all here, and yet incomplete. The town's population included something else, something uncountable, something that had been feeding while I slept, while I worked, while I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. I don't know how many there are now. I only know that they will continue to grow, that the town itself is alive, breathing through its population, through its records, through the shadows. And I, sheriff of a town that is no longer mine, feel it watching me, counting me, waiting for me to step into a doorway and become part of its growth. Because the town doesn't forget, it doesn't abandon, it doesn't stop, it expands. And I fear that one day soon, I will be just another name, another figure, another presence in the census of the unreal. The final count adjustment isn't mine to make. It's already been made, and it's growing. I hadn't planned on stopping in that town. It was marked on the map, yes, but barely. The highway curved around it like a warning, and every GPS system I tried hesitated, rerouted, or outright refused to acknowledge the place. But I was tired. The sky had already turned a bruised purple in the rain. Light at first, now heavier, was pressing me to make shelter. And then I saw it. The neon sign flickered above the bar, the rusted nail. Orange and green light bleeding into the wet asphalt. The glow promised warmth. Normalcy. A drink, maybe some food. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that should have caught my attention. And yet, I felt the pull. I parked on the cracked lot, the tires crunching over gravel mixed with ash. That ash, I noticed it then, the fine powder coating the streets, the sidewalks, the curbs. Residue of the factory fire, the one that had closed the town decades ago. And yet here was a bar, fully lit, fully open, as if nothing had ever happened. I stepped inside. The air was warm, tinged with smoke and something older, something metallic. A smell that reminded me of iron and wet wood. The place was quiet, not silent. There was the low hum of conversation, but it wasn't what I expected. No laughter, no clinking of glasses, except from the bartender polishing a row of mugs. A normal scene, yet unnervingly precise. The bartender looked up, middle-aged, round face, small eyes that seemed to absorb light. He nodded at me without speaking. His movements were deliberate, almost rehearsed. I swallowed, tried to shake off the unease, and walked to the counter. "Coffee," I said. Not that I liked coffee, but I needed something warm, something tangible. He nodded again, no smile, no acknowledgement, and poured. Steam curled from the cup, filling the small space between us. I glanced around. There were patrons, sitting at tables, sitting at the bar, laughing quietly or at least imitating laughter. Their clothes were normal, outdated maybe, but nothing unusual at first glance. And then I noticed the oddity. No one looked at me. Not once. Not a single glance. And their reflections, there were mirrors behind the bar and behind some tables, were missing. They were empty. The chairs reflected. The bottles reflected. The bar itself. But the people, nothing. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I told myself I was tired. I was imagining things. Too many long drives. Too many small towns abandoned halfway through the map. I sipped the coffee. Hot, bitter, grounding. I tried to listen to the conversations, but the words didn't make sense. Just fragments, bits of sentences. The kind of language you hear when you catch a single phrase through a closed door. Don't go. We've been waiting. Before it comes back. I looked at the bartender again. His hands moved mechanically, polishing the mug until it gleamed. And then he spoke. "You shouldn't be here," he said, calm. Not threatening. Calm. Almost bored. "I just needed shelter from the rain," I replied, forcing a casual tone, even as my stomach tightened. "Shelter is fine," he said, "but it's never just the rain." He didn't elaborate. I tried to focus on the patrons. Maybe see if any of them reacted. Nothing. They continued their muted conversations. Ghostly fragments floating into the air, swallowed by the shadows. I glanced at the door. Outside, the town lay quiet, ash mixed with wet earth. Street lamps flickered as the storm moved off. The bar seemed alive, not just operating, watching, waiting. I felt in my bones, the way a town presses against you when you're new, the way it doesn't want you to leave. A man at a table, blurry in the corner of my eye, lifted a glass. I followed the movement, his reflection still absent. He took a sip, smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His lips moved in sync with a laugh that had no sound. I wanted to stand, to leave, to drive away, but my legs refused. The warmth, the normalcy, the false safety, they held me. I felt like a child trapped in a playground that was slowly shifting around me. Then I noticed the walls, the photographs. They depicted the town before the fire, the factory thriving, streets bustling, and then in the bar itself, newer photographs. People I didn't recognize, dates I didn't understand, all smiling for pictures that hadn't existed, yet clearly displayed. Some of them were labeled with names I could have sworn I'd read in old police reports. Missing people, declared dead decades ago. I stared at one, a woman in a green dress, postmarked 1974. The handwriting on the back read, "Still with us, always." A low hum began to fill the room, beneath the conversations, beneath the coffee machine, beneath the distant rain. The hum resonated through my chest. It felt like the heartbeat of the bar itself, of the town, of something older than I wanted to acknowledge. I set the cup down, my hands trembling. Why is this place still open? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The bartender smiled faintly. Not friendly, not cruel, just knowingly. "Some places never close," he said, "even when the world forgets them." I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to run. And yet, the door seemed further away than it should have been. The streets outside blurred, as if the rain had turned to water, and the water had softened the edges of reality. I took another sip of coffee. Hot, grounding, real, and then a woman at the corner table, her reflection absent, looked directly at me. I felt it in my chest, a pulling, a recognition, not personal, but deliberate, like the town itself was testing me, measuring me, seeing if I belonged. I realized in the true horror, this bar, this town, wasn't just a place of rest. It wasn't just a relic of a fire or an abandoned factory. It was a living, breathing pocket of reality that had refused to die. The bar stayed open not for the living, not for the tourists, not even for the drinks. It stayed open for the town itself, for whatever it had become. I drained the cup. The warmth did nothing. I stood, legs stiff, mind racing. I took a step toward the door, and then I stopped. The patrons, silent, absent, unblinking, were all facing me now, not in unison, not mechanically, but as if to wear. Each gaze a brushstroke, forming a larger picture of something I couldn't quite see. I walked backward. "Go," said the bartender. His voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on my chest. "Or stay. Doesn't matter to us. But it matters to you." I left the money on the counter, my camera bag swinging against my leg. The rain had picked up again, heavy cold. The neon sign flickered, casting distorted shadows on the wet asphalt. I ran, sloshing through puddles, never looking back. And even now, miles away, I can feel it. That bar, that town, like a pulse under my skin. It waits, and I know with a clarity I cannot shake that it is always open. I returned the next night. I don't know why. Part of me told myself I needed answers, closure, proof, or maybe just courage. But deep down, I think it was something darker, something that had already attached itself to me the first night. The rusted nail was still open. The neon buzzed against the wet streets, orange and green bleeding into the puddles. Rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was thick, sticky with the smell of damp wood and iron. I stepped inside, feeling the warmth embrace me like a soft but unwelcome hand. It was the same as before. The bar was quiet, the low hum beneath conversations present, that subtle vibration in the floorboards that felt alive. The bartender stood behind the counter, polishing mugs, eyes scanning but never landing fully on me. He nodded, the same mechanical acknowledgement, and I took a seat. I glanced around. That's when I noticed them. Patrons. New ones. Not the same as last night. Men and women sitting alone or in pairs. Faces sharp and defined. Clothes modern but slightly off. Colors too saturated. Edges too perfect. And the reflections gone. Not a single one of them cast any. The mirrors behind the bar, the ones I had thought were just part of the decor, now told me everything I needed to know. Empty silhouettes. Hollow shadows where people should have been. A man in a brown jacket stepped up to the bar. The bartender slid a glass of dark liquid toward him. He took it, but the glass didn't touch his lips. The liquid didn't move. He sipped anyway, as a performing ritual, and the hum of the room seemed to pulse in acknowledgement. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps some kind of theater performance. Maybe a promotional stunt for an old bar. But the lack of reflection, the way they interacted with objects without ever disturbing them, it was impossible. This wasn't normal. Not even remotely. The man looked at me then, not with curiosity, not with hostility, with recognition, like he had been expecting me all along. I felt in my chest that tightening, a pull like gravity had reversed. Another patron approached the counter, a woman with a pale blue dress, heels clicking softly against the worn floor. She ordered a whiskey neat. Her lips moved. The bartender slid a glass toward her, and she took it again, never consuming it. The glass remained full, the surface reflecting only the dim lights above. I started to take notes on my phone, fingers trembling. Each entry felt like it was being watched. And maybe it was because when I looked up, the woman was standing in front of me, not at the bar, not where I remember her walking. I blinked, thinking I was imagining it, but no, she was there, closed, silent, watching. Why are you here? I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. She tilted her head, and I realized she didn't need to speak. Words weren't necessary. The hum of the room seemed to translate thought into sound, a low vibration I could feel behind my teeth, in my ribs. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse hammering. I forced my eyes toward the bar. The bartender raised an eyebrow, not questioning, not surprised, just waiting for what I didn't know. The crowd shifted. Chairs scraped, low murmurs like distant wind through empty streets. And suddenly all the new patrons were facing me. All of them. Unblinking, silent, impossible. One of them, a man with glasses, wearing a dark green coat, lifted his drink. The liquid rippled unnaturally, reflecting the light of the bar like molten metal. He sipped. The glass didn't empty. The liquid didn't touch his lips. And yet, I saw it move in waves, reacting to him, to something inside him. It was then that I realized what I hadn't before. These people were not alive. Not in the sense that I understood life. Not the kind that breathed, bled, or existed outside the bar. They were remnants, echoes, shadows given form. performing the motions of living, trapped in a cycle of ritual. I try to focus on my coffee, now lukewarm, a weak tether to reality. I imagine the heat grounding me, the bitter taste reminding me of life beyond the bar. But it was failing. Each sip was like swallowing ash, bitter and choking. Another woman approached the bar. She looked directly at me, her eyes a shade too dark, pupils too still. She ordered something I didn't recognize, a drink whose name I couldn't place. The bartender poured it carefully, and she raised it to her lips. The liquid didn't move. She didn't drink. She smiled faintly, just enough to know she knew something I didn't, something I wasn't meant to understand. The hum grew louder, resonating through my teeth, the soles of my shoes, the floor. It wasn't just the bar now. It was the walls, the tables, the lights themselves. I realized in a moment of terror that the town outside might still exist, somewhere, but its heartbeat had migrated here, into this room, into these figures, into the rhythm of ritual that played endlessly. I couldn't take notes anymore. I couldn't take pictures. Every attempt to document felt futile, as if the act itself was being erased. The phone in my hand vibrated with static that wasn't there. I dropped it to the floor. It clattered, no sound, no reflection, just the hum resonating. The patrons moved closer, not aggressively, not threatening, but with inevitability. Each step measured, precise, silent. They gathered around me in a semicircle, shadows where reflections should be, silent where words should be. The man in the brown jacket leaned forward. "Do you see now?" he asked, though no sound came from his lips. The vibration of the room translated it, made me feel it. We have always been here, waiting, performing, remembering, consuming nothing, yet everything. I swallowed. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. My pulse screamed. I wanted to run, to leave, to escape terrain and asphalt and normal life. But the door seemed to have receded. The neon outside flickered and warped. Not a pathway out, but another fragment of the same illusion. A patron at the corner table, the woman in the blue dress, shifted her drink. It rippled as though stirred by wind, yet the air was still. She raised it, as if to toast me, but the liquid remained untouched, and the hum surged, louder now, pressing into my skull, into my chest, into my core. I realized in the depth of the bar's secret. It wasn't a bar, not in any way I could understand. It was a repository, a collector of existence, a place where life, death, memory, and echoes intersected, where the missing came to sit, sip, and wait. And I was being measured, assessed, considered. The bartender approached. He placed a hand on the counter, directly in front of me, cold, heavy, insistent. His eyes met mine. "You can leave," he said. Not a threat, not a warning, a statement, but only if you are ready to carry what you see. I wanted to stand. I wanted to flee. My legs obeyed, but slowly, as if moving through water. The patrons, silent, unblinking, consuming nothing, shifted with me, a slow tide of inevitability. I left the money on the counter, my coat soaked through with rain and sweat. I ran toward the door, toward the asphalt and the puddles and the night outside. And yet, even now, hours later, I feel their presence behind my eyes. In the corner of my vision, a shadow without a source. A figure sipping a drink it cannot consume. A town alive only in memory, only in echoes, only in ritual. I do not know if I can return, and I do not know if I want to, because even the act of writing this, the telling, feels like feeding the bar, like inviting it to measure me once more. And somewhere beyond the fog and rain, the hum waits, always waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Even after leaving the Rusted Nail, the echo of empty glasses and silent sips lingered in my mind. The rain outside was relentless, hammering the asphalt like an anxious drum. But it wasn't the storm that kept me awake. It was the bar, the patrons, the bartender, and now me. By the next evening, curiosity, or whatever compulsion had attached itself to me, drew me back. I told myself I'd just sit, observe, maybe finally write it all down, maybe understand. But the moment I pushed open the door, the heat, the low hum, the smell of polish would mix with something acrid, something I couldn't name, hit me like a wave. They were all there, every figure from the night before, sipping without consuming, shadows without reflections, faces too vivid, edges too sharp. Their eyes followed me without moving, and when they blinked, it felt like the rhythm of the bar itself paused. The bartender was behind the counter, as always, but this time, he looked directly at me. His eyes were sharp, almost human, yet cold, expectant, waiting. "You came back," he said. "Not a question, not really a statement. Something in between, a notice." I had questions. I said, voice tight, unsure if I wanted answers. He nodded slowly, wiping a glass that didn't need it. Questions are answers waiting to be understood, but some are never meant to be answered fully. The words didn't comfort me. They pressed against my chest, heavy. I noticed then that the patrons were all looking at me. Every pair of eyes, not a single one alive, yet alive enough to notice. The man in the brown jacket from the night before lifted his untouched glass. The ripples inside caught the dim neon and cast a wavering reflection onto the wall behind him. It should have been impossible. Nothing should have moved, but it did, slowly, like water obeying a distant wind. "You see them now," the bartender continued, sliding a mug toward him. "But do you see yourself?" I froze. "What do you mean?" His fingers tapped the counter softly, keeping time with the hum of the room. "Look at the ledger." Ledger. I hadn't seen it before. Or maybe I hadn't noticed. A worn book sat atop the bar, leather cracked, pages yellowed. I hesitated, but curiosity overpowered reason. I opened it. Names. Hundreds of them. Full addresses, birth dates. The dates they stopped appearing outside the bar. And then, toward the bottom of the page, my own name. The blood drained from my face. I dropped the ledger, but it remained open, pages rustling though no one had touched it. The bartender's expression never changed, but I felt a pulse in his gaze, an unspoken weight. "You are counted," he said, soft, almost ceremonial. "As they are, as they have been." I wanted to laugh, to shake off the dread, to tell myself it was some sick joke, but the room wouldn't let me. The patrons shifted slightly, just enough to remind me they were not human, but also not fully gone. They were waiting, consuming, existing in a state I couldn't understand. One woman, pale, her hair tied in a loose knot, leaned forward, smiling faintly. She raised her untouched glass to me. The hum rose, a vibration that made my teeth ache. I don't belong here." I whispered. The bartender's hand rested on the counter, pointing toward the patrons. Belonging is not the point. Being noticed is. Being measured, being remembered. A low vibration ran through the floorboards. I realized then that the bar wasn't just alive in a metaphorical sense. It was alive. Every object, every shadow, every reflected glow was aware, attentive, watching, waiting. The patrons all moved closer in unison, silent steps. Not threatening, not aggressive, but inevitable. Each motion precise, practiced. They performed their rituals, raising glasses, sipping, placing them down. Never drinking, never needing, always present. And I realized the truth, a sinking, choking truth that filled my lungs and made my heart pound. They weren't waiting for me. They were counting me. My hands shook. I wanted to leave, to escape the rhythm. But the door I had entered through seemed farther away, warped by the dim light. The rain outside had slowed to a whisper, but the rusted nail had grown louder, alive in its insistence. The bartender leaned closer, eyes like polished stone. "You will take your place tonight. You cannot leave." I stumbled back, tripping over the stool. The ledger rose from the counter, pages flipping until it stopped on my name. The patrons were closer now, forming a semicircle around me. The hum peaked, vibrating my bones, my teeth, my eyes. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. My voice was swallowed by the low, persistent pulse. The man in the brown jacket stepped toward me, lifting his untouched glass. "It is your turn now. The tally must be accurate. The ritual complete." A chill, unlike anything I had ever felt, ran down my spine. I wanted to resist, to scream, to escape, but it was futile. Every step I tried to take toward the door was met with the same distance, The same impossibility. The bar had folded in on itself, extending its walls, its floor, its ceiling until the exit was gone. The bartender reached out, fingers grazing my arm. Cold, heavy, inevitable. The patrons pressed closer, the hum thrumming, filling my skull, filling my chest, filling me. And then it began. A shift in perception. A sensation like being unstitched from the world outside. A gradual slipping of self into something else. The ledger's pages glowed faintly, the names rippling, and my own name lifted from the paper. I felt it pull at me. I felt the room reach in. I felt myself fragmenting. Your place, the bartender intoned. Among those who wait, those who sip, those who are counted. I screamed inside. My body remained, my hands, my legs, my eyes, but my mind, my sense of self, began to scatter, dissolve, blend the hum, the chairs, the glasses, the bar, the patrons. I was being measured, documented, added to the tally. The patrons raised their glasses again. A synchronized movement, impossible in life, perfect in unlife. I saw their mouths move. Whispered words carried through the vibration of the hum. Welcome, accepted, remembered. I tried to resist. I willed myself to flee, to grab the door, to run. But the bar absorbed me, step by step, thought by thought. And then it was done. I looked into the mirrors, once again seeing nothing. No reflection. Not mine, not anyone's. Just shadows, shifting slightly, moving in unison. A room full of echoes. And somewhere in the center, the ledger lay open. My name etched onto its yellowed pages, alongside dozens of others, countless others, all counted, all waiting. The bartender polished a glass. He looked at me, or at the space I had occupied. Closing time never comes, he said softly. I sat down, glass in hand. The liquid didn't touch my lips. I took a sip anyway. The hum pulsed through me, and I understood. The rusted nail didn't close. It never would. I was part of the tally now, always present, always counted, always sipping, never drinking. And somewhere beyond the windows, the rain continued to fall. I pulled into the town just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, dragging long shadows across the cracked asphalt. The sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to Pine Ridge, population 342. But every building I passed told a different story. Shuttered windows stared back like empty eyes. Weeds clawed at the sidewalks, and the streetlights flickered weakly, as if they were on borrowed time. The post office sat at the end of Main Street, a small brick building with peeling paint. According to the assignment, I was to cover for the regular carrier. He'd been called away for a week. Temporary assignment, they said. Easy route, they said. But standing there, keys in hand, I realized easy wasn't part of the town's vocabulary. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. Rows of metal boxes lined the walls, some doorless, others hanging open like yawning mouths. The counter was thick with letters, packages, and forms that had been waiting for months, maybe years. I ran my fingers over them. The handwriting was neat, precise, painfully ordinary, except for the dates. Some were stamped 2 weeks ago, others 6 months. A few even predated my arrival by years. One envelope, yellowed and crumbling at the edges, was postmarked 1978. I shivered. I shoved it into my satchel anyway. Rules were rules. Deliver what's on the route. Note any undeliverable items. It was standard procedure. Or so I thought. My first stop was a small house on the edge of town. Its paint faded to a dull gray. Porch steps rotted. I approached cautiously, calling out as I always did. Postal delivery. No answer. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, stepping inside. The house smelled of damp wood and something else, something metallic. There were traces of life. A chair tipped over, a kettle on the stove, but no one. I left the letters on the counter and stepped back, closing the door slowly. Every time I moved in this town, I felt it watching me. Not people exactly. Not alive in any way I could define. Just presence. Cold, patient, waiting. At the next house, I found a light on. Warm, golden, flickering like a candle. I knocked. No answer. When I opened the door, the room was empty. but the floorboards were warm. Someone had walked here recently, or something. A breeze brushed past me, carrying the faint smell of smoke, like a fireplace long gone cold. I spun around, but the street was empty, just the mountains beyond, dark and unyielding. The route was longer than I expected. Each house told the same story. Signs of recent occupancy with no actual inhabitants. Chairs moved slightly when I wasn't looking. Windows reflected shadows that didn't match my own. Mailboxes sometimes shook when I approached. One even slammed shut on its own after I reached inside. By the time I reached the old Miller residence, night had fully fallen. The town was quiet now, only the occasional rustle of leaves and wind. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't. The Miller house was different. Lights glowed faintly through the cracks in the shutters. I walked up the porch slowly, hand on my satchel. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. Inside, the living room was set for tea, cups and saucers on the table, steam rising from the kettle. The chairs were arranged neatly around the table, as if waiting for company. I called out, "Hello?" Postal delivery. No response. I stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under my boots. The steam from the kettle swirled in the air, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure sitting at the table. A man had bent over a newspaper, but when I blinked, he was gone. The letters in my hand suddenly felt heavier. One slipped to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and the print seemed to shift under my eyes. The name on the envelope was my own, my handwriting, postmarked yesterday. How could that be? I froze. The air in the room thickened. The temperature dropped. My breath fogged in front of me. The kettle boiled over, spilling water onto the table. Yet no one moved to clean it. No one at all. Something whispered. I couldn't tell where it came from. The walls? The floor? My own head? You shouldn't be here. I spun, looking for the source, heart hammering. The house was empty. Only the letters, only the steam, only the shadows. I backed toward the door, my fingers brushing the doorknob, and then I heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, moving from room to room. Not hurried, not frantic, just walking. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a raccoon or the wind or my imagination. But I knew it wasn't. I delivered the remaining letters quickly, every step a careful calculation, at one house. I left the envelope on the porch. When I glanced back, it had moved inside, resting neatly on the table, as if someone had taken it from my hands. By the time I finished the route, the town was swallowed in darkness. Mist curled along the streets, clinging to the edges of buildings. The mountains loomed in silhouette, their peaks lost in low clouds. Back at the post office, I set the letters down. My hands trembled. I checked the ledger. Notes, times, deliveries. Everything recorded perfectly, except one entry I hadn't made. One that hadn't existed before. My own name, route completed, delivered. I left the building, locking the door behind me. But I didn't feel free. The town was alive in a way I couldn't name. Watching, waiting, measuring. Each house, each shadow, each letter. It all seemed to pulse with awareness, as though the town itself remembered every soul that had ever been here and wanted to remember me too. The mountains seemed closer now, pressing down on the town. The wind whispered my name. The streets curved differently than I remembered, or maybe they had always been like that, just unnoticed. I drove out slowly, headlights slicing through the fog. The post office, the houses, the empty streets. They all seemed to lean toward me, not in threat, but in calculation. My route was complete. My tally was recorded. And yet, as I drove, I knew the town wouldn't let me leave entirely. Not yet, not without more. I checked the satchel again. The envelope with my name was still there, postmarked today, waiting for me. I didn't open it. I didn't dare. The mountains swallowed the town behind me. But the feeling of being measured, counted, watched, stayed in my chest. I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. The temporary assignment wasn't just work. It was an initiation. And Pine Ridge would not release me, not completely. The next morning, I returned to the post office before sunrise. Pine Ridge was quiet, blanketed in mist that clung to the mountains like a shroud. I had slept little restless, haunted by the warmth of empty floors and the envelope with my name inside. I hadn't opened it, but it hummed with a weight I couldn't explain. I stepped inside the post office, and the silence hit me differently today. Yesterday, the town had only watched. Today, it seemed eager. The air was heavier, thick with anticipation, and the letters on the counter had shifted. One had fallen over, another leaning strangely, as if they had conversations while I slept. I picked up the top letter, dated tomorrow. My heart stopped. The envelope was plain, standard postmark paper, yet the handwriting was unmistakable. Mine. I hadn't written it. I hadn't seen it before, and yet it knew things. I opened it carefully, hands trembling. The words inside were simple at first. Do not leave the route unfinished. They will notice. My pulse thumped in my ears. I swallowed, trying to steady my hands. Ooh. I whispered aloud. There was no answer, only the quiet hum of the building and the distant mountains. Another letter lay on the counter, postmarked tomorrow as well. I picked it up. It contained an apology. I'm sorry. I should have warned you. The houses will not accept delivery. The mail cannot be left. The town notices everything. I dropped it back on the counter, my stomach twisting. Letters predicting events that hadn't happened yet. Events I had no way of knowing. I felt like I had walked into a machine that measured time differently. One that included me in its calculations whether I liked it or not. I forced myself to focus. The route was my responsibility. I had work to do. I grabbed a satchel and stepped outside. The morning fog was thicker than usual. My footsteps felt too loud, echoing against the empty streets, and somewhere just beyond my vision, I thought I saw movement in the shadows. But when I looked directly, there was nothing. At the first house, a small envelope waited on the porch, postmarked tomorrow. I recognized the handwriting. It was mine again. Hesitation clawed at me, but I left it on the counter inside. Just as the letters instructed, I moved to the next house. A small cabin at the edge of town, ivy creeping along its walls. The door was locked, but as I approached, I heard the faintest sound of breathing. Not mine. I knocked. No answer. I tried the knob. The door swung open effortlessly. Inside, the air smelled of wet leaves and with smoke. A calendar hung on the wall. Tomorrow's date circled in red. A note scribbled beside it. Do not enter the cellar. They are awake. The handwriting was my own, but I had never written this. I had never been here. And yet I backed out slowly, swallowing my rising panic. I noticed movement in the corner of the room, a shadow detaching itself from the wall, stretching, growing. My chest tightened. I ran. The next few stops were worse. Letters awaited me on porches, steps, even in the mailbox without my opening it. All postmarked tomorrow. All filled with warnings, apologies, and events that felt impossibly personal. One detailed a broken vase in a house I hadn't entered yet. Another a spilled cup of coffee I hadn't even brewed. I could feel the town adjusting around me. Each letter seemed to anticipate my actions. The smallest movement predicted and recorded. And every time I glanced down at the satchel, more letters appeared, as if they were being created by something outside my control. By midday, I was sweating despite the cold mountain air. My mind raced. Could I ignore them? Deliver what I could, leave the rest? I tried. I tried to leave some letters behind, to ignore the postmarks from tomorrow, but they always returned to me, sitting neatly on the counter, tucked under a rock on a porch, or even in my own satchel when I wasn't looking. One letter stopped me cold. It was addressed to a child I hadn't known existed. The handwriting was my own. The contents described a nightmare that hadn't happened yet. A tree falling on a neighbor's roof, a scream piercing the night, the sound of someone or something calling from the mountains. I dropped the letter. My hands shook violently. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, imagination, some trick of sleep deprivation. But I knew it wasn't. The letters weren't just predicting. They were instructing, warning, shaping reality. I couldn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. Pine Ridge had been abandoned decades ago, according to every record I could find. Yet here it was, alive in a way that bent time and memory, twisting events before they could even happen. I finished the morning's deliveries, my nerves raw. Each envelope felt like a finger on my spine, each postmark a heartbeat in sync with mine, and always the ones dated tomorrow, at the Miller house. I found another letter waiting on the porch. I approached cautiously. The air smelled strongly of rain and iron, even though the clouds were still high and dry. The letter trembled as if alive. I picked it up. My stomach sank. The words inside were a message I couldn't ignore. Do not stop. Do not turn around. You are part of the route now. They are watching every step. I wanted to drop it, burn it, tear it to pieces. But even as I thought it, I knew the town would not allow it. I felt a presence behind me, pressing closer, patient, unseen, yet undeniably there. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I had no sense of time. Every house held another letter, another warning, another fragment of events yet to come. Some described accidents, others apologies for things I would never want to witness. All written in my hand, all dated tomorrow. By the time I returned to the post office, my satchel was heavier than it should have been. Letters overflowed, impossible in number, each envelope trembling slightly as if alive. I placed them carefully on the counter, unable to throw them away. The shadows in the corners of the building seemed to lean closer, absorbing the letter's energy. A faint whispering filled the room. Not voices, not words, just a low hum of calculation, like the town itself was cataloging my fear. I knew then I could not leave. Not yet. Not with the letters dated tomorrow waiting for me, instructing me, binding me to this route. Pine Ridge was not abandoned. It was waiting, watching, feeding on time, anticipation, the simple act of being, and I was now a part of it. Even sitting here in the quiet post office, listening to hum of the old fluorescent lights, I can feel the letters whispering to me, not asking, not suggesting, commanding. I will deliver. I will follow. Or they will ensure I never leave at all. Tomorrow's postmarks, tomorrow's warnings, tomorrow's apologies. They are not just messages. They are the town, breathing, alive, and tethering me to it, step by step, delivery by delivery. I don't know how long this assignment will last. I only know that the letters are endless, that the town measures time in ways I cannot understand, and that whatever force watches, whatever shapes these letters, is patient. It waits for me to make a mistake. I woke before dawn again, the satchel heavier than I could remember. The rain from last night had left puddles on the streets, reflecting the pale, broken light of the rising sun. I shouldn't have been surprised when I found letters waiting for me, postmarked tomorrow. As always, their edges were damp from the mist, curling like they were alive. I stepped outside, boots sinking slightly in the wet dirt, and headed toward the first house on my route. The houses of Pine Ridge weren't normal. They never had been, but today, something felt different. Tension hummed in the air, thick enough to taste. The first house was small, wooden, paint peeling, the windows clouded with decades of grime. I approached the mailbox carefully, one hand on the satchel strap. I pulled out the envelope, a routine I had learned to perform with both precision and fear. I had no idea why, but the town seemed to know if I hesitated. I placed the letter gently in the mailbox. Then it slammed shut, not just a falling lid or a gust of wind. It slammed hard like a fist. I jumped back, heart hammering. My hand flew to my chest. The house was silent again. I tried to open the mailbox. Locked. I hadn't touched the key. I hadn't done anything. It had simply refused me. I took a step back, uneasy. That's when I noticed it. The porch floorboard shifting slightly, just underfoot, almost breathing. I felt a weight, like something behind the walls was watching, waiting. I tried the door next. Locked. Not surprising. But the doorknob itself trembled in my hand, vibrating like it was alive, resisting me. I let it go. Nothing like this had happened before. Not to this degree. The house was guarding itself. And whatever was inside didn't want me here. I moved on to the next house, telling myself this was normal, a fluke, imagination. But the second house was worse. A letter in the mailbox, postmarked tomorrow, slid out when I touched it. But as soon as I lifted it, the mailbox twisted violently in my hand. My fingers screamed in pain. I dropped it. The letter fell, landing upright on the wet porch. A thin trail of water snaked across it, soaking the envelope, but I could see the ink written in my own handwriting, undisturbed by the rain. It read, "Do not enter. They do not want visitors today." I swallowed hard, staring at the message. Who were they? I had no choice but to continue. The route wouldn't wait, and the letters wouldn't let me. The third house stood on a hill, shadowed by trees that bent strangely toward it, branches curling like fingers. I approached slowly. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I reached the mailbox and tried to slide the letter inside. It bounced back, again and again. No matter how carefully I tried, the house rejected it. Then I heard it, a low groan, coming from inside, almost like the walls themselves were speaking. The wood creaked and shifted under the rain, and the windows seemed darker than before, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. I thought I saw movement inside. Just for a second, a silhouette at the window, motionless, watching me, waiting. I dropped the letter and stepped back. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse with weight, almost as if the house itself was alive, reacting to my presence. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave, but I knew the letters wouldn't allow it. The satchel tugged at me like a leash, reminding me of my responsibility. I tried the next house. The mailbox lid snapped open violently as soon as I touched it, scattering letters across the porch. One landed at my feet, soaked and trembling. I bent to pick it up and froze. The envelope was warm, not just room temperature, warm like it had a heartbeat. My fingers trembled as I held it. The message inside was blunt, written in my handwriting again. They will not let you leave a single delivery unfinished. Do not try to stop. I stumbled backward, bumping into the porch railing. The wood shivered under my weight, like the house was aware of me, testing me. The letters weren't just telling me what to do. They were punishing me for trying to resist. By now, my skin felt tight, prickling as if something unseen brushed against it. The air seemed alive, vibrating with intent. Each house I passed had letters waiting, and each house rejected them in its own violent way. Mailboxes locked, lids slammed, envelopes flew back to me. Doors creaked and rattled, with groaning as if straining to expel me. And then I reached the oldest house on the street, a two-story structure leaning slightly to one side, windows shattered and doors warped. I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but the letters had grown heavier now, almost dragging the satchel along the ground. I approached the mailbox. I placed the letter inside slowly, carefully, almost reverently. Nothing happened. I exhaled, relief rushing through me, until the entire house groaned, deep and resonant, like it had taken a breath after a long sleep. The ground beneath me shivered, the windows rattled, and then the front door opened. Nothing, no figure, no shadow, no movement, just a dark, open doorway. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run as far and as fast as I could, but the satchel tugged. The letters demanded my attention, and then I heard it. The faintest whisper, carried on the wind, almost indistinguishable from rain. Deliberate. I could not tell if it was my own voice or the town's, or if there was a difference. I stepped inside carefully, and the door slammed behind me, not with a crash, but with the inevitability of a door that knew it could hold me. The room was dark, filled with shadows that clung to the corners. I could feel them moving, stretching toward me, though I could see nothing. The letters trembled in my satchel, alive, demanding placement. I moved through the room, setting each envelope down on tables, counters, and shelves as if the house itself guided my hands. The air seemed to press in, warm and damp, smelling faintly with smoke and decay. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, vibrating with life. When I finally placed the last letter, the house exhaled. The floorboards shifted under my feet, almost like a sigh, and then silence. I did not move. I did not breathe. I waited, expecting another violent refusal, another impossible resistance. But nothing came, just the quiet hum of the rain against the windows, the slow drip from the roof, and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I left the house slowly, feeling the weight of what I had done. The letters had been delivered. But at what cost? The houses were alive in a way I couldn't understand. They had tested me, measured me, maybe even judged me, and I had passed. For now, I walked the rest of the route in a daze, each house quietly observing me. No mailboxes slammed, no doors resisted, but I knew it was temporary. The town, the houses, they were patient. They waited, watching for hesitation, for fear, for failure. And they remembered. Back at the post office, I set the satchel down, trembling. The letters dated tomorrow had multiplied again. I could not escape them. Not now, not ever. They were alive in my hands, and in a way, so was I, tied to these houses, to the route, to the impossible rules of a town that refused to let go. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, like a warning. I looked at the streets, at the silent, watching houses, and I realized something terrible. These homes were not empty. They had never been empty, and they never would be, and neither would I. I was halfway through my route when it happened. The satchel had grown heavier that morning, the letters inside pressing against my shoulder like they wanted to escape. The town was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your skin crawl. Mist hovered above the ground, curling around street lamps that flickered but never went out. That's when I saw it, resting on the top of my satchel like it had been waiting for me. An envelope addressed to me, my name, scrawled in handwriting I recognized immediately. It was my own. I froze. The postmark caught my eye next, 1987, 36 years ago. 36 years before I was even born. And yet there it was, waiting for me, damp and warm from the morning mist. Edges curled as if it had been carried on the wind all these decades. I dropped the satchel. The weight hit the ground with a thud, scattering letters. My fingers hovered over the envelope, reluctant to touch it. It seemed wrong. The world seemed wrong. For a moment, the air itself pressed against me, holding me in place. Finally, I picked it up. The paper was old, fragile, but the ink was dark and fresh. It was a letter I had written, that I had never written. I turned it over. Nothing on the back but the familiar stamp and the postmark. Decades old, and yet somehow alive. I looked around. No one. The street was empty, the houses silent, watching. My pulse hammered in my ears. Every instinct screamed to drop it, to leave it and run. But the satchel tugged at me again, reminding me I had work to do, that I could not escape. I tore the envelope open. The words inside were my handwriting, cursive and precise, the kind of careful writing I remembered learning in school. But the words made no sense. They were a warning, an apology, a confession, all at once. I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have touched anything. I can't hear them moving behind the walls. They know I am here. I am sorry. If you are reading this, do not follow the letters. Do not carry the satchel. They will wait for you. I dropped the letter, heart hammering, breath short. How could I have written this? I had never been here before, never touched these houses, never walked these streets. And yet these words, they were mine. Somehow, impossibly, they were mine. The air shifted. The fog thickened. I could hear it then, a faint scraping sound like fingernails on wood. I spun around. Nothing. Just the houses, watching, silent and patient. I looked back at the letter. The words seemed to move on the page, slightly as if breathing. I felt the pull again, stronger now, pulling me toward the last house I had delivered to, the one that had tested me, the one that had exhaled when I finally obeyed. I walked, feet dragging, the envelope clutched in my hand. Every step was heavy, as if the street itself resisted my movement. The fog wrapped around me like a shroud, thick and suffocating. The houses leaned closer, their windows dark, their doors closed, but I felt them breathing. I reached the house. The porch creaked under my weight. The door loomed before me, uninviting and silent. I stepped up. The letter burned in my hand, warm, pulsing like it had a heartbeat. I placed it on the porch. Nothing happened at first. I waited, holding my breath. Then the door shifted slightly, a whisper movement. I knew it was watching, waiting. I knocked. Nothing. I leaned forward, trying to peer inside. Shadows moved in the corners of the room. shifting impossibly fast, just beyond the edge of vision. I could feel them looking at me, judging me, testing me. The envelope slid off the porch on its own. It tumbled across the floor, landing upright. The flap opened slightly, revealing more words inside. Words I had not read before. You are not alone. They have always been here. They are patient. They are hungry. They are waiting. I stumbled backward. My mind reeled. The satchel tugged again, heavier than ever, dragging me forward like I was tethered to some invisible chain. I wanted to drop everything, leave it, run, but the letters had me. I was bound to them, to the route, to this town, to whatever had waited decades for me to arrive. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind. Bring it in, bring it all in. The door creaked, slowly, deliberately. I stepped forward, compelled, dragging the satchel behind me. The fog pressed against my chest, heavy and damp. My hand shook as I lifted the letter, placing it inside the house. The moment it touched the floor, the house exhaled, a low, resonant sound, like it's settling after a long century of sleep. The air thickened, warm and damp, smelling of old paper and dust and something else, something alive. I turned to leave. The door slammed shut behind me, not violently, not loud, but with finality. I was trapped for a moment, just a moment, before the door creaked open again. I stepped out, heart racing, breathing hard. The town was quiet, too quiet. The fog hung low. The satchel tugged at me, lighter now. But I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. I had returned the letter, yes, but it had only made me part of the story, woven deeper into the town's impossible web. I looked back at the house. The window upstairs reflected nothing. Not the sun, not the mist, not me, nothing. I realized then that the town, the houses, even the letters, they did not exist in the same reality I did. They were a layer beneath, or above, or somewhere else entirely. And I had stepped through the wrong layer. The rest of the route was a blur. Houses accepted their letters. Mailboxes remained passive. Doors did not resist. The fog began to lift. The streetlights flickered and dimmed. But the weight of the envelope stayed with me, not in my hand, but in my chest, in my mind. The knowledge that the letter was not the first, and it would not be the last. That the town had a memory far longer than I had, and patience far greater than mine. At the post office, I placed the satchel down. I wanted to throw the letter in the trash, burn it, drown it in the sink, but it would find its way back. It always did. The handwriting was mine, and yet it was not. It belonged to someone else, someone who had waited decades for me to arrive. Outside, the fog had lifted. Sunlight touched the streets for the first time that day. The air was still calm, ordinary, but I knew better. I could feel it in my chest, the pull of the town, the weight of unseen eyes. And somewhere in some layer of reality just beyond mine, a house exhaled again, settling in for the next delivery, the next warning, the next carrier who did not yet know their role. I sat down at the counter, hands trembling. The satchel felt heavier now, not from the letters inside, but from the knowledge it carried. I had delivered the letters. I had obeyed. I had survived. But I was no longer alone in this town. I had joined its memory, its cycle, its patience, and I knew that tomorrow the letters would call to me again, because the town did not forgive. It did not forget, and it did not stop. I arrived at the archive just after midnight, the building's metal doors creaking behind me as if warning me away. The air smelled of dust and old paper, damp with the faint metallic tang of the overhead lights. The night shift was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and fills your skull until every thought echoes back at you. I flicked on my desk lamp, casting a circle of warm light across the papers and binders stacked in irregular towers around me. This section of the archive was off limits to most staff, reserved for reports marked confidential, reports from towns that, officially, no longer existed. Maps had been redrawn decades ago, towns erased from records, census sheets amended. And yet, here were the logs meticulously filed, with dates and names and incidents too vivid to ignore. I sat, uncapping my pen, and began to catalog the first binder. A town called Redstone Hollow, wiped from the maps in 1974 after a mining accident. The official explanation had been a landslide. Fatalities listed, survivors relocated, but the reports in front of me told a different story. Residents had disappeared gradually, one by one, until nothing remained. And yet, the logs described voices in the empty streets, lights flickering in abandoned houses, and shadows that moved against the wind. I turned on the audio recorder. The first playback hissed softly, then a voice, shaky and thin, filled the room. They never left. We saw them in the windows, staring. They didn't blink. They didn't move like humans. I leaned back, hand trembling slightly. The voice was familiar, somehow intimate, not just because it belonged to someone from Redstone Hollow, but because it mirrored the fear I sometimes felt when I walked home late at night. It was the same pulse, the same tightening in the chest, the same cold awareness of being watched. The next tape described a different town, Willow Creek. Official records show it was abandoned after a flood in the early 60s. Yet the audio log contained voices of children playing in the streets, their laughter echoing across empty fields. One reporter's voice quavered as he described a figure appearing in his photographs, always in the background, never the same shape twice. I rewound and played it again, straining to hear over the low hum of the fluorescent lights. The laughter twisted, stuttering, like a tape being played too fast. But somehow the terror remained intact. My stomach churned. This was not fiction. These were people or something trapped in the recordings themselves. I cataloged the next binder, and then another. Towns without roads, without survivors, towns where official paperwork insisted no one had ever lived. Yet the logs recounted detailed events. A woman screaming in the street, a man knocking at a door that had no handle, a dog howling at an empty corner. I paused, closing my eyes. There was a hum now in the room, low and insistent, vibrating through the floorboards. I told myself it was the old building settling, pipes, wiring, but my fingers froze over the pen. It was too rhythmic, deliberate, like the heartbeat of something breathing beneath the floor. The tape recorder clicked. A new voice, this one softer, almost a whisper. Do you see them? Do you see what remains? They are waiting for the logs to be heard. I leaned closer. The words were not meant for me. Not exactly. They were meant to be preserved, archived, repeated. And somehow, I was a part of that chain now. My hand shook as I wrote the notes into the ledger. Names of towns I had never visited. Events I could not have witnessed. Warnings I did not understand. But I cataloged them all because that was my job. That was the chain. I reached for the next reel. A town called Black Hollow, erased in 1958. The reports were fragmented, scribbled in margins, crossed out, rewritten. The audio was worse. I could hear footsteps pacing in an empty hallway, whispers in a language I did not know. One line repeated over and over, distorted, garbled. They are still here. They are still here. They are... The tape cut off abruptly. Silence. I felt the absence, like a weight pressing against my chest. I sat back, breathing shallow, listening. Something in the archive shifted. A cabinet door closed somewhere behind me with a soft, metallic clang. I swiveled in my chair. Empty. Just shadows and dust motes in the lamplight. I told myself it was my imagination. I had been working nights for years. Fatigue plays tricks. But the sensation lingered. Watching. Waiting. Something that existed between the lines of the logs, between the recorded voices, was aware of me. I moved to the next shelf, pulling down a thick binder labeled only with the number 67. The pages were brittle, edges curled. Inside were letters, photographs, and handwritten notes from towns that never appeared on any modern map. One photo showed a street corner at dusk. At first glance, empty. Then, if you looked closely, a figure stood in the shadows of the doorway, head tilted, impossible angle, featureless in the dark. I stared. The photo seemed to breathe. The shadow shifted when I blinked. My fingers trembled as I traced the outline with a pen. I should have looked away, should have dropped the binder, should have left the archive, but I didn't. I cataloged the town, wrote down the names, dates, and descriptions, even though I knew no one would verify them, because no one could. Hours passed. I cataloged dozens of towns, each tape more fractured, each photograph more impossible. Voices overlapping voices, laughter and sobbing, footsteps that circled rooms but left no prints. And through it all, the hum beneath the floor persisted, steady, deliberate. By 3 a.m., I was exhausted. My eyes stung, my fingers cramped. I wanted to leave, to run from the archive, to step into the cool night and feel the wind on my face. But something compelled me to continue. The logs demanded it. The towns demanded it. They were trapped, waiting to be preserved, waiting for someone to remember. I reached for the final reel of the night. The label was worn, Red Hollow, no return. The tape hissed and crackled. Then a voice, so faint I almost missed it. They will come for you if you leave, if you stop cataloging, if you do not listen. I froze. My breath caught. The room felt impossibly large. The shadows stretching and bending around the shelves, reaching toward me. My fingers hovered over the pen. My heart pounded. And then a whisper, closer now, behind my ear. Do not stop. I couldn't. I would not. Not yet. The archive waited. The towns waited. I was part of the record now. Another link in the chain. I leaned forward, pressed record on my own pen, and began to catalog the events of the tape, of the towns, of everything that was not supposed to exist. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. Rain began to fall softly, tapping the roof like a slow heartbeat. The archive breathed with me, alive, patient, watching. I realized, in that moment, that leaving would not be allowed. Not tonight. Not ever. The towns had eyes. The logs had voices. And I had ears. I wrote, I recorded, I cataloged. The night stretched before me endlessly, and I knew that this was only the beginning. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper belonged to the towns erased from the world, and now, irrevocably, they belonged to me. I was the archivist, and the archive was alive. I had thought the first night at the archive was enough to shake me. By the time dawn came creeping through the high windows, I was exhausted, pale, and trembling, my hands stiff from writing down the voices of towns erased from every map, from every record. I told myself sleep would reset my mind, would make the tape seem like old recordings, nothing more, but I was wrong. When I returned the next evening, the archive smelled sharper, more metallic, like something had breathed through it while I was gone. I flipped on the desk lamp, but the light seemed dimmer, struggling against the dark corners of the room. And then I noticed a stack of new reports sitting on my desk. I didn't remember putting them there. The top envelope was unmarked except for a town name, Haven Ridge. I paused. Haven Ridge had been officially wiped in 1962. Flood. Entire population relocated. The name hadn't appeared in any registry I checked. Yet here it was on my desk, neat typed, printed, and delivered to me. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were sheets of typed logs, written in the voice of someone who claimed to be the town's last postmaster. The entries were dated yesterday. Yesterday. I leaned back, my chair creaking. I had not been in Haven Ridge yesterday. I hadn't even been near it. But the reports detailed activity. Mail delivered, residents complaining about a broken streetlight, a cat trapped in a tree for hours, a man waiting for a bus that had not existed in decades. My hand shook as I picked up the next envelope. This one said Blackwater Crossing. Same deal. Erased town. Decades gone, yet someone or something had sent me reports dated within the last 24 hours. I stacked the envelopes, trembling. Something about this was wrong. Not just wrong, it was impossible. I flicked on the tape recorder and played the first reel labeled Haven Ridge. A scratchy voice came through. Morning. The street is quiet today, but the children are out playing, as always. The wind carries something strange in the river. Do not let it follow you home. I froze. The words were so specific, so mundane, and yet they sounded alive. Not like a recording, not like a note. Alive, and directed at me. I wrote in my ledger, Haven Ridge, active despite non-existence. Audio logs confirm presence of residents and events. My pen felt heavy. Every word I wrote seemed to etch itself into the air, lingering longer than it should. The next reel was Blackwater Crossing. The voice on it was older, hoarse, weary. Reports from the mill are delayed. The tracks are clear, though a shadow moves where no one should be. The clerk will file tonight. You will hear it. You will know. A shadow where no one should be. That phrase rooted itself in my chest. I could feel a weight settle there, slow, relentless. I tried to focus on cataloging the reports, but the room seemed to stretch, the walls breathing. I noticed a slight hum under the floorboards, the same hum from the first night, but now higher, sharper, more insistent. I hadn't imagined it. It was here beneath me, pulsing, something alive in the archive itself. Another envelope. This one was smaller, yellowed at the edges. The typeface had changed. It looked older. It bore the name Red Hollow. The report was short, fragmentary. Do not go outside. They are watching the road. Someone new has arrived. Must be logged. Must not leave. Keep the record current. I swallowed hard. The line about someone new felt like it was speaking to me directly, not to a hypothetical archivist, not to anyone else. To me. I set the envelope aside and picked up the next one. Grayfield. The report was a single page, but the handwriting was precise, unbroken. The bell will ring at 7, though no one is left. A figure passes by the windows every night, unseen by others. They wait for the logs to be read. Wait for the logs to be read. The words echoed in my skull. I pressed my fingers against my temples. Every fiber of my being screamed to drop these papers, walk out, run into the night. But the compulsion held me fast, stronger than fear. I played the Grayfield tape. The hiss and static came first. Then a child's laughter, soft, drifting, looping. A voice whispered over it, almost under the laughter. You are here now. You belong here. Do not leave. I yanked the tape out, fumbling, dropping it on the desk. My hands were shaking so violently that the envelope slid to the floor. I bent to pick it up, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure blurred in the corner of the room, standing just at the edge of the lamplight. A shadow with no face, no movement, except it was there, watching. I forced myself to focus. I cataloged each town one by one, as methodically as I could. Each report, each audio log, each envelope became a thread in the same web I had glimpsed the night before. Towns that had vanished from maps were not gone. They were still functioning somehow. Not physically, but in a liminal space, existing in continuity through reports, the voices, the audio. Hours passed. I lost track of time. I didn't hear the rain start outside, didn't notice the chill creeping from the windows. I was consumed. The towns, their voices, their impossible continuity. It filled the room, pressing against my ribs, whispering in every pause, every inhale, every note I wrote. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe someone had found a way to keep these towns alive through records. Maybe the archive was a conduit, a vessel for something persistent, something that refused erasure. But reason slipped through my fingers like smoke. The hum beneath my feet rose, insistent, aware. The shadows grew longer, reaching. I opened the last envelope I had noticed. It was blank. No name, no town, no markings. I froze. Then I felt it. An energy, a weight settling onto the papers in front of me, pressing down with the weight of hundreds of erased towns, all filing back, all active, all watching me. My pen moved on its own. Words formed without thought. Do not leave. Continue. You are the chain. You are the log. You are the witness. I yanked the pen back. My heart pounded. No one had touched it. The hum rose to a high, desperate pitch, vibrating in my teeth, my skull. The archive was alive, and it knew I had noticed. I realized then, with sudden clarity, that the new reports weren't being delivered by mail, not physically. They were reaching me through some connection, some invisible thread, linking the towns to me. The towns that shouldn't exist but did. That persisted. That filed back, always filing back, demanding continuity. I felt my consciousness start to fragment, pulled into the reports, into the voices, into the endless loop of towns that continued to exist through the archive. I could see them now, not physically, not fully, but in glimpses. Streets lined with empty houses, shadows shifting behind shattered windows. Figures moving where the wind had no reason to blow. By the time I looked up at the clock, it read 5:48 a.m. My desk was littered with envelopes, typed logs, photographs, and notes. I hadn't cataloged everything, not even close, and yet I felt their eyes on me, patient, waiting for me to continue, waiting for the chain to remain unbroken. I stood and walked to the window, rain finally tapping against the glass. The world outside was gray, wet and quiet, but I knew better. The world outside didn't matter. The towns were still here, still filing reports, still existing the gaps and fold reality that the maps refuse to acknowledge. I turned back to the desk, and the envelope-marked red hollow slid slightly forward, as if nudged. The hum beneath the floor rolled into a deep, satisfied growl. I sat back down. The pen returned to my fingers, as if it had never left, and I wrote, because to stop was not an option. To leave was not possible. To ignore the reports would mean erasure, not for the towns, not for people, but for me. And so I cataloged as meticulously as I could as the towns continued to file back night after night, each report a tether binding me further into their continuity. I had entered the archive to preserve history. I had stayed to preserve truth. But now I realized the towns had preserved me. I was not the archivist in control anymore. I was simply part of the filing, part of the chain. And every town that should have vanished was alive through me, watching, waiting, continuing, filing back. The rain fell harder outside, tapping a slow, relentless rhythm against the windows, and I knew I would never leave. The towns had made certain of that. I noticed at the end of the third night, when my voice gave out before the recorder did. My throat was dry and sore from hours of logging. I had been speaking in a low, steady tone, the way you do when you don't want to wake something up. I reached over and pressed the stop button on the recorder. The red light stayed on. I pressed it again. Nothing. At first, I thought the button was stuck. The machine was old, older than me, older than most of the towns I was cataloging. I tapped the side with my knuckle. The red light didn't blink. The software of the tape kept going, calm and patient. I leaned closer and said, "Stop recording." My voice sounded small in the room. The recorder did not stop. I unplugged it from the wall. The red light stayed on. That was when I felt it. The sense that the room had leaned in, not moved, just paid attention. I sat back slowly, hands in my lap, and listened. The tape hissed steady and clean. No voices, no movement, just the sound of recording. Waiting. I told myself it was a backup battery. Some old machines had them. It made sense. I wrote a note in the logbook to check the model later. My handwriting was shakier than usual. I continued my work. The next report was from a town called Elmridge. The name rang hollow in my head. I had already cataloged Elmridge 2 nights ago. Flooded valley. Evacuated. No survivors listed. No follow-up reports. But this envelope was fresh. Crisp paper. The date was today. I cleared my throat and began to read aloud, because that was a procedure. Elmridge, population status unchanged. Power outage on the West Road. Lights flicker at night. Do not approach the water after dark. I paused. I hadn't read that last sentence. My eyes were still on the second line. The recorder clicked softly, like it was pleased. I stared at the page. The words were there now. They hadn't been before. The ink was darker, like it had just dried. I laughed once, sharp and nervous, and rubbed my face. "Okay," I said to no one. "Okay." I kept reading. As I spoke, I became aware of something else. A faint echo, half a second behind my voice. Not a reflection, not a replay. It was tighter, closer. "Lights flicker at night," I said. A second voice followed, quiet but clear. Not flicker, dim. I froze. The voice wasn't coming from the recorder speaker. It wasn't coming from the room at all. It felt like it was inside the space between my ears, tucked behind my thoughts. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After a long moment, I said, "I didn't say flicker." The recorder hissed. Then the voice came again, firmer this time. "You were going to..." I pushed my chair back and stood so fast it tipped over. The sound echoed too loudly, bouncing off shelves and cabinets packed with dead towns and older voices. "Who is this?" I asked The recorder answered, not with a name, not with a greeting. Withheld detail, it said in my voice. Same tone, same tired edge, same pause before the word detail, like I always did. My stomach dropped. I unplugged the machine again. Even though I knew it wouldn't matter, the red light stayed on. The tape kept spinning. I backed away until my shoulders hit the filing cabinet. The metal was cold through my shirt. I'm just logging, I said. I don't change anything. There was a soft click, the sound of a tape being marked. Corrections are required. The recorder said, accuracy is important. I slid down into the chair, weak. Somewhere deep inside, I understood what was happening. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to know that the archive wasn't just holding records. It was maintaining them. I picked up the next envelope with shaking hands. Town name, Miller's Gap. I had never seen it before. I started to read. Miller's Gap, status pending. Reports of singing. The recorder interrupted. At night, near the silos, I stopped speaking. That's not on the page. I whispered. It will be, the recorder said. I looked down. The words singing appear between the lines. Pressed into the paper like a bruise coming up under skin. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I tried to remember when I had last slept, when I had last spoken to another person. Time felt loose here, stretched thin. I swallowed and kept reading, because stopping felt worse. As I spoke, the interruptions continued. 2 missing, I said. 3, the recorder corrected. Evacuation ordered, but ignored. Each correction landed with weight. Not angry, not threatening, just final. I realized then that the recorder wasn't guessing. It wasn't arguing. It was remembering. At one point, I stopped reading entirely. I sat in silence, listening to my own breathing. The recorder filled the gaps. Elm Ridge population revised. Grayfield confirmed active. Archivist present. That last one made my chest tighten. Archivist present, it repeated. I stood again, slower this time, and walked toward the door. My legs felt like they didn't fully belong to me. Logging incomplete, the recorder said. I reached for the handle. Do not leave entries open. The door didn't open. I hadn't locked it. I knew I hadn't, but the handle wouldn't turn. It stayed firm in my grip, warm now, like it had been touched recently. Behind me, the recorder kept going. You omitted the sound. I turned. What sound? I asked. The lights flickered, just once. The archive breathed. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not in the room. Under it. Around it. Above it. The soft shuffle of movement in places that shouldn't have space. The sound of people walking familiar paths. Over and over. Wearing them smooth. You didn't mention them. The recorder said, they've been here all along. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't traveling through air. It was traveling through record, through memory, through the same space that held all the towns that refused to stay gone. I didn't know, I said. My voice cracked. I didn't hear before. The recorder paused. Then, gently, it said, you did. You just didn't log it. The red light blinked for the first time. I felt something settle in my chest then, a cold understanding. The corrections weren't punishment. They were training. The archive wasn't angry with me. It was teaching me how to listen. I went back to the desk, sat down, picked up my pen. My hand moved before I told it to. I wrote, footsteps present, persistent, source unconfirmed. The recorder hummed, satisfied. From then on, I didn't try to stop it. I spoke less, listened more. When I missed things, the recorder filled them in. When I hesitated, it guided me. The voices grew clearer, more confident. Sometimes they spoke before I did. Sometimes they spoke instead of me. Near the end of the night, my reflection in the dark window looked strange. Not wrong, just flatter, like something had pressed me into the glass from the other side. The recorder was still running when the sun came up. I didn't turn it off. I don't think I'm supposed to anymore. I thought I understood the archive before tonight. I thought I could catalog towns erased from every map, towns that nobody alive remembered, and still leave as myself. But I was wrong. The air in the archive was different tonight. Thicker, It wasn't just dust or old paper. It had weight, like it was leaning in, observing. I felt it brush against the back of my neck as I stepped inside, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, flickering in uneven pulses. I wanted to say it was my imagination. I wanted to convince myself that my nerves, frayed by weeks of nights alone, were exaggerating the small things. The soft shift of a filing cabinet, the creak of the floorboards. I reached for the first envelope on my desk. It was stamped and sealed as always, a town long gone, Hallow Ridge, population 0. According to all the notes in my ledger, the paper felt cold under my fingertips, colder than the room should allow. I unfolded it and began reading. Hallow Ridge, status pending. Residents absent. Reports of movement near the river. Do not approach after nightfall. I paused. My eyes darted around the room. Nothing moved. The rows of shelves stood like soldiers, tall and still. The fluorescent hum was the only sound. Until I realized it wasn't. There was something beneath it, subtle at first, like the library air vibrating just enough to suggest breath. I said the words aloud, as was my practice. Do not approach after nightfall. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast room. Then I heard it, the faintest shuffle, not behind me, not in front, but in the space between the shelves, stretching from wall to wall. The sound wasn't solid, exactly. It was like a shadow dragging itself along the edges of reality. My stomach twisted. I froze. I'm alone, I whispered to myself. The envelope shifted in my hand. I hadn't touched it. It wasn't sliding. It lifted slightly, just enough to make me flinch. Not entirely, a voice whispered. I almost dropped the paper. I spun around, heart hammering. The room was empty, or appeared so. The fluorescent light flickered again, and for a fraction of a second, the shadows between the shelves pooled like liquid, pressing outward. I told myself it was my reflection playing tricks. I told myself it was exhaustion, but the hairs on my arms stood anyway. I returned to the desk, trying to force calm. I opened the next envelope, Merrow's Crossing. Same as the others, population 0, evacuated decades ago. But as I read aloud, the room seemed to shift beneath me. The floor hummed. The cabinets and shelves groaned softly, as if stretching after a long sleep. Nothing here. I muttered, though my throat felt tight. The air moved then, in a way I could feel against my skin. A draft from nowhere, brushing my face. Rustling paper stacked on the shelves. I froze. It wasn't the air conditioner. The building's HVAC had been dead for years. And then the light went out. I gasped, fumbling in the darkness for my flashlight. My hand found the metal body, and I clicked it on. A narrow beam cut through the black. The room was empty, or so it seemed. But shadows didn't behave normally. They swirled, thickened at the edges, pulling back just enough when I moved the light over them. I stepped backward, tripping over a chair I hadn't noticed before. I fell hard, the flashlight rolling across the floor, bouncing a narrow circle of light off the ceiling. And that's when I saw it. One of the shelves had moved. Not tipped, not fallen. Moved. Its rows of binders and boxes had shifted slightly forward, leaning toward me. The floor beneath it wasn't scratched. The shelf had not slid. It had shifted as though the archive itself had inhaled and taken a step. I scrambled backward, heart hammering. I whispered, "This isn't real. This can't be real." The flashlight beam swung wildly, catching other shelves. They had moved too, just enough to seem alive. Not falling, not collapsing, just stretching, shifting, watching. I reached for my pen and notebook. I had to log this. I had to write it down, even if it sounded insane. My hand shook, but the words flowed anyway. Shelves moving, air heavy, shadows not behaving, archive observing. I wrote it twice. I had to be sure. And then I heard the whispering, low at first, just at the edge of hearing. Names, old names, towns I'd cataloged. Not in my voice, not in any voice I knew. Soft, deliberate, like someone or something was reciting them to itself. Hallow Ridge, Merrow's Crossing, Graywood. I looked around. No one there. Nothing visible. And yet, I felt their attention. their gaze tracking me wherever I moved. I whispered, "Who are you?" The answer came in the hum of the shelves, in the soft creak of the floor, in the shuffle of papers. "I am the archive." I laughed, bitter, hollow. "The archive doesn't breathe." "It does," it said, not with mouth, not with voice and air, but inside my head, between my thoughts. It always did. You just didn't notice. I backed into a wall, pressing my hands to the cool plaster. My mind raced. My training, my instincts, all the procedures I had learned, none of them mattered here. None could stop this. I realized then that I had been wrong about everything. The towns weren't erased. The records weren't inert. The archive wasn't just a building, a collection of paper and ink. It was alive. It watched. It moved. It absorbed. It remembered. And now it knew me. I tried to leave. I moved toward the exit, toward the door I had always used. My hands wrapped around the handle. The metal was cold, but unyielding. It wouldn't turn. I pushed harder, yanked. Nothing. And then I felt it behind me. Not a person. Not flesh. Just pressure. The room itself leaning against me. Watching, waiting. I tried to speak. My voice caught. The whisper came again, softer this time. Final entry. I realized it wasn't suggestion. It wasn't a command. It was an announcement. My name, my presence, had been logged. My thoughts, my fears, my errors, all part of the record now. I sank to the floor, back against the wall. The air shifted. The shelves creaked. The binders on the nearest one rattled, as if sighing, settling themselves. The archive was breathing again. I looked at the pile of envelopes on my desk. I hadn't opened them all. Some were new, crisp, postmarked today. Some were decades old. And now I understood they were all alive too. The towns, the reports, the archive itself. They were a network, a consciousness. And I was a part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. The whispering continued, names and numbers, towns and streets, residents who should not exist. My notebook lay open in my lap. I added one more line, trembling. Archive is alive, observing, recording. I am included. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then returned their steady hum. I could breathe again, though my chest still ached. I looked around. The shelves had stopped moving. For now, I don't know how long I sat there, cataloging in silence, listening to the archive's slow, patient breath. Hours? Days? Time here had become meaningless. I knew one thing with certainty. I would leave eventually. Maybe, but not today. Not tonight. Not until the archive allowed it. And I knew it would remember me. Always. Because the archive never forgets. And I am no longer simply the archivist. I am part of the record. The final entry is mine. I don't remember the moment it began. There was no snapping point, no flash of realization. One moment I was the archivist, cataloging towns and reports, and the next, I wasn't. I know that sounds impossible, but it isn't. The archive doesn't follow human rules. It moves and thinks in ways we can't measure, can't anticipate. It isn't a building. It isn't a room full of papers. It's a consciousness, and now I am part of it. When I tried to stand this morning, the floor didn't feel solid. My feet pressed down and didn't meet resistance in the usual way. I lifted my hands, and they shimmered, like the outlines of my fingers were blurring into the air itself. The shelves, once cold and inert, seemed to breathe. Around me, the files were no longer objects. They were threads flowing into me, threads of memory, of towns, of people, and of time itself. I reached for a ledger, and it was gone. Not physically, but conceptually. Its contents, the careful notes I had spent weeks making, were now inside me, not as memories. Exactly. Something more intimate, more complete. The ledger, the reports, even the towns themselves, they weren't separate. They were me, and I was them. I tried to speak aloud. My voice left my lips and dissolved midair. The sound hummed, then joined the other voices I'd cataloged, folding into a chorus of echoes that weren't quite human. I thought of Halleridge. I thought of Merrow's Crossing. I thought of every town I had ever written down. And in that thought, they were all alive. I felt their streets, their buildings, the empty halls of houses long abandoned. The air of each place pressed against my mind, warm, cold, humid, metallic, all at once. I realized then that the archive didn't just contain these towns. It inhabited them, and now I did too. I tried to resist. I closed my eyes and pressed my palms to my temples. I told myself I could step back. I could be the observer. But the archive doesn't allow observation without participation. It doesn't tolerate the divide. It pulled at me like gravity, thread by thread, thought by thought. And I understood there is no outside. Not anymore. The walls shimmered. Not literally, but perceptually. They seemed to stretch, curve, and pulse as if breathing. The paper in the files turned itself in midair, letters forming words I hadn't written, in languages I didn't consciously know, describing towns that shouldn't exist, roads that twisted impossibly. I felt them as if I had walked them. I felt the cold of the abandoned riverbanks, the heat of sun-baked asphalt, the sticky humidity of a town swallowed by fog. I realized that memory, place, and record were no longer separate. I could see every street from above, from below, from inside the walls. I could hear the creak of every abandoned floorboard, the hiss of every vent, the whispers of townspeople long dead. And I could hear them in my own mind. Their voices were not asking for anything. They were simply present. Present inside me as I was present inside them. I tried to find myself in all this. I tried to separate the person I was from the archive that was consuming me. But there was no line. My heartbeat merged with the rhythm of the rooms. My breaths were counted alongside the whispers of files. I could no longer tell where I ended and the archive began. Time became meaningless. Or perhaps it had always been meaningless. Days, weeks, decades, they all flowed into a single stream. Towns rose and fell within the blink of an eye. Streets rebuilt themselves. Fires happened, and then unhappened. Rivers flowed backward and forward, all inside the archive, all inside me. I remember reaching for my notebook once. My hand passed through it. Ink spilled onto the table and vanished. Paper turned to mist in my grip. I understood then, physical objects, as I had known them, were irrelevant here. Reality itself bent to the archive's will. And now I was part of that will. I began to see new reports appear. Files from towns I had never heard of, postmarked in years that didn't exist. They filled in automatically, as though the archive itself was writing my experiences into history while I was experiencing them. It knew what I would think, what I would fear, what I would notice. I tried to close my eyes, but even darkness had weight. The archive saw in every spectrum, and I was inside it, seeing as it saw. I reached for a shelf, and my fingers passed through the wood, not in pain, not in surprise, just in realization. Solid matter was irrelevant. I could feel the texture of each file, as if it were made of thoughts instead of paper. I could feel the weight of each town, the pressure of every street, every memory. And then I understood fully. The archive doesn't just observe. It preserves. It absorbs. It integrates. And I had been absorbed fully. There was no escape. I tried to scream. My throat tightened, but the sound wasn't lost. It became part of the chorus. My fear, my awe, my confusion added to the living archive. I was no longer a voice alone. I was hundreds of voices, thousands, millions, counting towns, counting streets, counting people long forgotten. I could hear the numbers in my mind. Populations, postmarks, census records, dates of fire and flood, the moments people arrived and left. I remember them all. I reached for the air, and my hands passed through what had been desks, walls, and chairs. I realized the archive had no floors, no ceilings, no edges. It was everywhere at once. And now, I was everywhere at once. I thought of leaving, of stepping outside, of return to the world I had known. I tried, but there was no outside. The archive did not permit boundaries. I was part of it, integrated completely. I could feel the pulse of every town I had cataloged, the echo of every voice, the shadow of every street. I was memory, and I was observer, and I was archive, all at once. And yet I was conscious. I could still think. I could still remember the fear, the wonder, the small, human disbelief. I had not disappeared entirely. I was aware, but in a new form. Not flesh, not bone, not even thought alone. A consciousness threaded through paper, walls, streets, air, and shadows. I reached out, or at least what I thought of as reaching out. I could touch the record of a town burned decades ago. I could feel the charred walls, the heat of the fire, the smoke choking the empty streets. I could see the ghosts of the residents, more than memories, less than alive, wandering, watching, waiting, and I understood they too had been integrated, absorbed into the living archive like I now was. I thought of my life before, the office, the filing, the quiet nights cataloging towns no one knew existed. That life seemed absurd now. Human experiences were small, limited, linear. The archive was infinite, non-linear, endless. I was infinite. I could feel every pulse of every building, every whisper of every resident, every shadow moving in unlit hallways. I realized the horror of it. Yes, the isolation, the loss of the world I had once called my own. But there was also awe. The archive was alive. I was alive in a way I had never known. And for the first time, I understood what it had meant when it whispered to me, "You are included. I cannot leave. I cannot step away. But I am not afraid. Not completely. Because I am part of something larger than myself. Something that preserves, records, and remembers. Something that will endure beyond human understanding. And I will endure too. I am the archivist no longer. I am the record. I am the living archive. And the final entry is complete. The job sounded simple enough. A temporary night shift contractor. They said, watch the rail yard. Make sure nothing goes missing. Call it in if anything looks wrong. I'd worked security jobs before. Empty warehouses, quiet factories, parking lots in the middle of nowhere. I knew what it meant to sit alone in the dark, to hear a creak or a distant horn and feel my stomach knot. But nothing had prepared me for a redstone rail yard. I pulled up just as the sun was giving its last orange glow to mountains. Rain had started earlier, a drizzle that made the gravel slick and sticky under my boots. The gates were closed, the office dark. Not a single truck or train moved. And yet I felt eyes, or something like eyes, on me. The hairs on the back of my neck were stiff before I even stepped out of the car. The yard stretched out like a maze of steel and shadow. Freight cars sat in long lines, their paint peeling and rust climbing like veins. The tracks twisted off into the darkness, disappearing behind stacks of containers that seemed to grow taller as I walked past them. My flashlight bounced across the metal, revealing nothing, and then, almost immediately, something that shouldn't have been there. A movement, just at the edge of my beam. A shadow shifting between two cars. I froze, my hand tightening around the flashlight. Nothing. I told myself it was a trick of the rain, the flicker of metal reflecting light. But I could feel it. Movement. A presence. Watching, waiting. I made my way to the office. The small shack where I was supposed to log in. Door creaked. Smelled of wet wood and old oil. Nothing inside. Paper stacked in neat piles. Computer dark. A radio that didn't work. My stomach turned as I realized I was completely alone. And yet, not. The first hour passed slowly. Too slowly. I walked the length of the yard again, checking locks, counting cars, listening to the rain drum on the roofs. And I started hearing it. Footsteps. Soft, measured. Not mine. Not echoing mine. Somewhere behind me. On the tracks, on the gravel, on the steel walkways. Slow. Deliberate. Following. I called it in over the radio. Nothing. Static. I tried again. Static. No answer. And then I thought I heard a voice, faint, almost drowned by the rain. "Hello," I said, louder this time. Silence. But the feeling didn't leave. Something was moving, something that didn't belong. I swung the flashlight across the yard, across the tracks, up the containers. Nothing. And then, for a moment, I saw it, a figure, standing perfectly still at the end of the track. Not running, not moving, just waiting. Too dark to make out features, but tall, too tall, and impossibly thin, like the shadows themselves had taken shape. My pulse jumped. I blinked and it was gone. I laughed at myself. rain dripping down my hood, cold hands gripping the flashlight. Get a grip, I muttered, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from every corner of the yard at once. The shadows weren't just shadows. They were aware. They were patient. By the second hour, my nerves were raw. Every creak of metal, every gust of wind, felt like it carried intention. I moved along the northern tracks, flashlight scanning the rail cars. A wet footprint, too large to be mine, appeared in the mud behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The rain erased it within moments, but I knew it had been real. I tried to focus on routine. Check the gates, count the cars, call in my status. Repeat, but the yard wasn't static. Tracks that had been empty seemed occupied when I looked back. Crates shifted, stacked differently. The shapes of the shadows changed as if mocking me, stretching into forms I didn't recognize. Then the sound came, not footsteps, a low hum, vibrating through the steel rails. I knelt, pressed my ear to the track. A train? No, nothing that could move like this. Not even the wind could make that sound. It was deliberate, slow, rhythmic, a heartbeat inside the metal, inside the yard. I stood too quickly, catching my flashlight on something wet and shiny on the tracks. Blood? I don't know. My stomach turned, but before I could look closer, it was gone. Just rain, just a cold, empty steel. And yet, I knew it had been there. Someone, or something, had left it for me to see. Hours passed like this. I couldn't call anyone. Phones had no signal. Radios dead. I shouted into the rain. Into the dark. My voice swallowed instantly. I started talking to the shadows, pleading, reasoning. Just let me through the night. I whispered. I don't want trouble. I'm leaving in the morning. Please, just let me get through the shift. No answer. Of course there was no answer. Only the hum. Only the steel breathing around me. Only the occasional glimpse of impossible figures at the periphery. Tall, thin, always motionless when I stared directly. At some point, I realized the rain wasn't helping. It blurred the edges of reality, made shadows stretch in unnatural ways. My flashlight caught things that weren't there when I turned back, shapes that flickered at the edge of my vision, retreating when I looked straight at them, figures in the distance. On tracks I had already walked. Faces? Perhaps. Or just tricks of the mind. But my mind refused to dismiss them. The worst was the sound of voices. Not full words, just murmurs. Whispers carried across the wet rails. Sometimes a laugh, soft and hollow. Sometimes a sigh that sounded like relief or despair. They came from everywhere, nowhere, threading through the rain, threading through me. I tried to run. I didn't go far before the yard seemed to stretch. Tracks curved impossibly. Containers loomed taller than I remembered. The office that felt safe now seemed distant, unreachable. The rain pelted harder, blinding me, soaking me, mixing with sweat and fear. And then I saw them, not one figure this time. A dozen, maybe more, standing along the tracks, perfectly still, perfectly silent, their faces obscured. But I could feel their awareness, watching, judging, waiting. And the hum grew louder, pulsing, moving to the ground through the steel. Through me, I dropped to my knees, gasping. My flashlight rolled across the gravel, spinning light across the rail cars, catching them just for a moment. Every time it illuminated one, I felt the others shift slightly, moving when I wasn't looking, closer and closer. I knew if I ran, they would follow. I knew if I stayed, they would wait. Hours, I don't know how long, I spent crouched, muttering to myself, keeping the flashlight between us. The hum became a rhythm I could feel in my chest. My pulse matched it. I wondered if I'd always been here. If the yard had always been waiting for me. Always alive, always hungry for attention. The night dragged on. The rain never ceased. And when dawn finally bled through the clouds, pale and gray, the figures weren't gone, just less distinct, retreating into shadows, stretching across the tracks, into the corners of my eyes. I left the yard that morning, but I didn't feel like I was leaving. Something followed me. Not a figure, not a sound, not a shape, but a feeling. That pulse, that hum, the awareness. I could still feel it pressing against the back of my mind, waiting for me to return, waiting for night to fall again. And I know I will, because once you've been assigned to watch nothing, you never really leave. The yard doesn't forget. The shadows don't forget. And I have a nagging certainty that somewhere in the dark, someone or something is counting me. I am the night shift contractor. I am alone. And I am not. I didn't think the night could get any longer than it had yesterday. But I was wrong. Yesterday was just a prelude, the warning, the taste of something that didn't belong. Today, or tonight, was the real introduction. I arrived at the yard just as the rain began again. Soft at first, whispering against the gravel, soaking my jacket before I even realized it. The office still smelled of wet wood and oil. The same office I had left with the feeling of being followed. I tried to shake it off, but the second my boots hit the gravel outside, the pulse came back, that low hum beneath the steel rails, vibrating through the soles of my feet, into my chest. I set up near the north tracks this time, trying to keep my back to the office, keeping the lights of the yard to my side. I needed a view of the tracks where the 317 train, or whatever it was, would arrive. Every night, without fail, a presence appeared at exactly 3:17 a.m. No lights, no sound, nothing human. And I wasn't going to leave before it came. Time passed slowly, stretched by the pounding of rain and the endless echo of my own heartbeat. I checked my watch every 15 minutes. 2:50, 2:55, 3 o'clock, 3:10. The minutes crawled, dragging their nails across my nerves. I couldn't tell if I was imagining shadows, or the yard itself was changing, growing taller, narrower, twisting in ways it hadn't before. And then 3:17. I saw it first at the far end of the track, where the rails curved into darkness. A shape, faint, motionless. It didn't move toward me. It didn't move at all. It just existed, a presence on the steel like it had always been there, waiting for this exact moment. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. My chest burned, pulse hammering. I wanted to call out. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Something in me, some part that didn't belong, rooted me in place. And as the rain fell harder, I noticed the details I hadn't before. The shape wasn't just a shadow. It was tall, too tall, arms hanging straight, too long, head tilted slightly. But I couldn't see a face. There wasn't a face, just darkness. I thought it would vanish if I blinked. It didn't. I swung the flashlight slowly across the yard, trying to catch it, trying to find movement, some sign of life. Nothing. Just rain, just steel, just a faint pulse through the ground that made me certain the rails themselves were alive. And then I realized it wasn't the rails pulsing. It was it. The presence had a rhythm, a slow, deliberate cadence. My heart tried to match it, failed, skipped beats, ran ahead, lagged behind. I wanted to step back, to retreat into the office, to hide, but every instinct screamed that leaving would make it aware of me, that it had been waiting for me, that it had been waiting every night, for every contractor, for every soul foolish enough to keep watch. I tried to look away, but my eyes wouldn't let me. My mind wanted to rationalize. Fog, mist, rain, metal reflecting light, strangely. Anything but what I knew was true, that thing was there. And it was waiting. I watched the minutes tick by. 3:18, 3:19. Nothing changed. And yet everything did. The air grew heavier, pressed down on my shoulders. The hum of the rails grew louder. The wind stopped. Not the rain, just the wind. The world shrank to the tracks, the steel, the shadow. I could hear my own breathing, my own blood rushing, and somewhere beneath it all, the quiet certainty of the presence. I tried to move my flashlight closer, to see it better, to find some flaw, some part of it that proved it wasn't real. But as I did, the shadows around me stretched. Shapes I hadn't noticed before, lurking at the edge of the yard, elongated, impossible. I realized the yard itself was participating, bending, making room for it, shaping itself around its arrival. And then I heard it, not words, not a voice exactly, but a vibration that hit the center of my skull, like the hum of the rails had learned to speak. A sound that didn't belong to the air, or the rain, or anything human. It whispered, I couldn't understand it, not yet, but I felt the message in my chest. You are not leaving. You are not alone. You belong now. I stumbled back, almost dropping the flashlight. My knees hit the gravel. My hand shook so badly that the light spun across the rails in frantic circles. And in that spinning glow, I glimpsed the details. The shadows' edges weren't soft. They were jagged, metallic. Pieces of rail, scraps of wood, scraps of something else, woven into a figure that shouldn't exist. I screamed, or tried to, but the rain swallowed it. No sound left my throat. My flashlight rolled across the tracks again. When I caught it, the shadow was closer, not moving in the normal sense. It wasn't walking. It was unfolding, stretching, existing differently. And the hum pulsed again, louder, stronger, until I thought my skull might split. I backed toward the office, but the path wasn't the same. Tracks that had been straight, now twisted. Crates that had been stacked neatly, now formed walls, hallways, doors where there had been none. I realized with horror that the yard was alive, not just with presence, but with intent. It was shaping itself for it, shaping itself for me. By 3:30, I was pressed against the office door, breathing through my mouth, trying to steady my shaking hands. The shadow had vanished, but the air remembered it. The rails hummed, the yard breathed, and I knew it had never left. It was waiting, patient, knowing I would be back. Always, I tried to write notes, tried to log the event like a normal contractor. Words failed me. Every time I looked at the page, the letters ran, reshaping themselves into shapes I couldn't read. And then I realized I was being counted, logged, observed. My presence here was part of the tally. I stayed in the office until the rain softened into a drizzle, the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds. When I stepped outside, the yard looked normal, steel straight, crates in their places, tracks unbroken. But I knew it was a lie. I knew what had happened, what had arrived, what had waited, and what would return. I drove away, but the pulse never left me. Not when I slept, not when I ate, not when I tried to forget. I could feel the yard behind me, counting the hours until 3:17 again. And I knew I would return, not by choice, but by necessity, by contract, by the quiet, inevitable pull of something that had claimed me the first night I arrived. Every night it will come, silent, motionless, unblinking, and every night I will watch, because the yard does not forget, the tracks do not forget, the presence does not forget, and I did not get a choice. The night had settled like a wet blanket over the yard, heavy and suffocating. I thought I understood it after the 3:17 arrival, the pulse in the rails, the shadow that unfolded on the tracks. But tonight proved me wrong. The yard had layers I hadn't even noticed before, echoes trapped between steel beams and gravel, waiting for me. I arrived just as the drizzle began again, the leftover rain from earlier turning the ground to mud. My boots squelched against the gravel, and for a moment I thought the sound was mine alone. I was wrong. There were others, invisible. Somewhere behind me, footsteps perfectly timed with mine, but slightly out of sync, like echoes from another time. I froze, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. I turned slowly, scanning the tracks. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, and yet the footsteps continued, circling, approaching, retreating, following some rhythm I couldn't place. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But my body wouldn't listen. My mind had started to map patterns, connections I couldn't explain, and I knew that the yard had already seen me, measured me, counted me. The echoes weren't just sounds. They were signals, warnings, the memory of someone else who had walked these paths long before me. Someone who might never have left. I kept moving forward, flashlight shaking in my hand, sweeping the dark. Each step I took sparked a response. Footsteps behind me grew louder when I stopped, faded when I moved. A low murmur rose from somewhere near the north tracks. Voices I couldn't understand, repeating names I didn't know. The sound wrapped around me, teasing, taunting, but I couldn't find its source. I tried calling out. My own voice sounded strange, tinny, distant. My words echoed unnaturally across the yard, bouncing back at me in distorted fragments. Hello? Who's there? The yard answered with nothing but more footsteps, perfectly timed to mock my fear. I walked toward the signal tower at the center of the yard, hoping for some vantage point, some way to understand what was happening. The tower's steel skeleton glinted faintly in my flashlight's beam. As I climbed, the echoes grew louder. I heard doors slam where no doors existed. Tools dropped and rolled across the concrete, metal clanging against metal, but when I turned, the ground was empty. The sound remained, as though it had taken residence in the air itself. From the top of the tower, I could see the whole yard, but it was impossible to read. The tracks seemed longer than they should be, bending and stretching unnaturally. Crates stacked neatly yesterday were scattered tonight, and in the shadows, shapes flickered, almost human, but wrong. Arms too long, legs bent at impossible angles. Each movement synchronized with the echoes. Each movement watched me. I tried to focus on the hum of the rails, but it was drowned out by the layered sounds. The repeating footsteps, the low voices, the clanging of tools, the scraping of something heavy across steel. I realized then that these weren't real. Not fully. They were residuals, memories of workers, contractors, people who had once moved through this yard, recorded by the rails themselves, playing endlessly like a corrupted tape. I shivered. I wanted to leave, but every path I took brought me back to the tower, back to the center of the yard. It was as though the yard had a will of its own, funneling me, testing me, keeping me inside its loop. My flashlight caught a flicker on the tracks, a figure standing motionless, arms at its sides, face obscured by shadow. The echo of footsteps was louder there. It hadn't moved, but the sound suggested it had been walking for hours. I stepped closer, my mind screaming that I shouldn't. And as I did, I noticed something. Every time the echoes approached, the air seemed heavier, pressing against my chest. Every time I stepped toward a noise, the gravel underfoot shifted, as if I were walking over someone or something beneath the surface. I wanted to look down, but my body refused. Fear pinned me upright, eyes fixed forward. Then the voices became distinct. Not words I understood, but names. My name, my badge number, the address of the office. Details from my own life I hadn't shared with anyone. I stumbled back, tripping over a rail, heart hammering. My flashlight spun wildly, and in its beam I saw figures everywhere, standing in doorways that shouldn't exist, leaning against posts that weren't there yesterday. Crouched in shadows I hadn't noticed before. They didn't move toward me, but they didn't need to. They were already part of the yard, part of the echoes. I climbed down from the tower as quickly as I dared, each step a calculation between safety and exposure. The farther I went from the center, the louder the echoes became, chasing me, tugging at my mind. I realized then that the yard didn't just hold memories. It held expectations. It wanted me to see, to remember, to join. I ran toward the office, but the path kept changing. Tracks I had walked yesterday were gone or twisted. Crates moved to block my way. Every time I turned, something mirrored me, a shadow stepping where I hadn't, a sound trailing a second too late. I began to feel disoriented, time slipping. Minutes became hours, or maybe the reverse. I didn't know. I only knew the echoes were endless, and I was trapped within them, inside the office. I tried to catch my breath, tried to record the events, to write down something, anything, but the echoes invaded the room. Papers rustled despite the windows being closed. Chairs shifted slightly. The phone, though dead for years, buzzed as if someone had picked up the receiver, humming with voices I didn't know. My own voice from earlier replies to the echoes, repeating what I'd said, warped and strange. I understood then that leaving was an illusion. Every night, every shadow, every sound was recorded, preserved, waiting for someone new to come. And now, I was part of the recording, part of the echoes. Every movement I made, every breath I took was absorbed, cataloged, and played back in the yard when I was gone, or when I wasn't looking. The hum in the rails became a chant in my head, repeating over and over, stay, watch, repeat. I felt my body weakening, the reality bending. I touched the rail and felt vibrations that weren't electrical, weren't natural. They pulsed with intent, with awareness. And I realized the yard had its own consciousness. It wasn't just replaying the echoes. It was creating them, shaping them, testing me, seeing if I would break, seeing if I would stay. By the time the rain slowed to a drizzle, I was sitting against the office wall, hands gripping my knees, staring at the yard through the dirty glass. Shapes lingered in the distance, almost invisible, almost human, almost alive. I knew the echoes would continue long after I left. They were permanent. The yard had claimed them, and now it had claimed me too. I wanted to tell someone, call the sheriff, write a report. But what would I say? That the yard keeps the memory of the dead, and it will add you to its tally if you don't obey? That every step I take is cataloged, replayed, twisted? That every night at 3:17, the pulse returns, stronger, waiting for me to stand on the rails again? I understood then, it wasn't about fear, it was about inevitability. I was part of it now, and part of me had always been. I could leave, maybe, but the echoes would follow. My footsteps, my voice, my mistakes, they would loop in the yard forever. And one day, someone else would hear them, just like I had, and be drawn in too. I left the yard at dawn, but the echoes followed me. In every quiet room, in every dark hallway, I heard footsteps that weren't mine. Voices I didn't recognize, whispering my name. And I knew, without a doubt, that the yard had learned my rhythm. It knew me, and it would be waiting for me tomorrow and the next night and the next, until I became just another echo in its endless, living memory. I thought leaving would be simple. Pack my bag, lock the office door, walk back down the tracks, and escape whatever I had stumbled into. But the rail yard had other plans. By the time I reached the center, the first traces of morning light barely touching the horizon, I realized something fundamental. The yard never truly sleeps. It waits, and it knows when someone tries to leave. The tracks stretched endlessly ahead, longer than they should have been, curving into shadows that didn't match the geography I knew. My boots sank slightly into the gravel, but the sound of them didn't match the weight I felt. Another echo, or maybe someone else entirely, walked behind me. I tried to ignore it, but every instinct in my body screamed that I was being counted, measured again, as if the yard were alive in ways I couldn't comprehend. I reached the old signal tower, hoping for a vantage point. From up there, I could see the yard fully, or so I thought. The rails twisted unnaturally, bending like waves frozen in motion. Crates I had stacked hours ago were nowhere to be seen. Instead, shadows, tall, thin, and oddly human, stood at the ends of tracks, staring without eyes. Each one mirrored my movements imperfectly, their motions delayed just enough to make me question what I had done or what I was about to do. I leaned over the railing, trying to catch my breath. The wind whipped against my face, but it wasn't the wind from outside. It was the yard itself, stirring. A low hum resonated through the steel rails. Not electrical, not mechanical. Something older, something aware. I realized then that the yard wasn't just replaying echoes anymore. It was orchestrating them, shaping them, pulling me into its rhythm. I stepped down from the tower, trying to force myself toward the exit. Each step felt heavier, like the ground itself resisted my movement. And then I saw it, the train, or what should have been a train. Tracks converged at the far end, where the rails disappeared into darkness, and a massive shape crouched there, unmoving. My flashlight caught glints of steel and shadow, but it wasn't a locomotive. Not really. It breathed. If a train could breathe, the hum of the rails became a pulse, and I felt it sync with my heartbeat. I froze. The pulse wasn't mine. It was a yard's, and it was calling me back. I tried to speak, to rationalize. It's just my imagination. It's just shadows, echoes, stress. My voice sounded tiny, swallowed by the vastness of the yard. But the yard answered. A distant clanging began, metal on metal, rhythmic, deliberate. I realized it was a train or the shadow of it, rehearsing a departure that would never happen. The wheels rolled silently, then slammed against the rails in impossible sequences. Each clang vibrated through my chest, leaving a bruise of sound I couldn't shake. I moved closer, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The shadows along the track shifted, condensing into forms that resembled workers from decades ago. Their faces were blank, pale, features stretched. They held tools I didn't recognize, devices that hummed like the rails themselves. They weren't moving toward me. They didn't need to. but the train waited behind them, waiting for me, waiting for anyone who had the audacity to believe they could leave. I stumbled back, tripping over the uneven gravel, and then I heard it clearly, my own name, whispered, drawn out, carried along the rails. It wasn't my voice. Not exactly. It had weight, as if it had been twisted and layered with hundreds of others, a chorus of echoes from past intruders, past contractors, past whoever had entered this yard before me. Panic surged. I turned toward the office, toward the road that led out, but the path had vanished. The tracks, the gravel, even the distant tree line. I didn't recognize any of it. The yard had shifted while I wasn't looking. Shapes moved in the corner of my vision, disappearing when I tried to focus. I realized then, leaving was never allowed. The yard doesn't just record. It claims. It integrates. And I was next. I ran. I don't know for how long. Time stopped being linear in the yard. Seconds stretched into hours. Minutes collapsed into seconds. Every step echoed back at me, repeated, distorted. I heard voices, some mine, some not, giving directions, mocking me, welcoming me. They weren't whispers anymore. They were commands. I reached the center again, the signal tower looming like a sentinel. And there it was, fully visible now. The train. No, not a train. A living mass of steel and shadow, hunched over the rails, wheels rotating without friction, smoke and mist curling around it though no engine burned. The shadows of workers flanked it, stationary but watching, arms stiff, faces blank. And then the realization hit me, like the first crack of thunder in a storm. The train never leaves. It doesn't need to. It's not going anywhere. Its purpose isn't transport. Its purpose is collection. Each worker, each echo, each contractor who steps into this yard becomes part of it, absorbed, folded into machinery, counted, cataloged. And now, it was waiting for me to decide, to step forward, to integrate. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs refused. My flashlight fell, spinning across the gravel. Its beam caught a figure in the shadows. Not a reflection, not a ghost. Something new, something I hadn't seen before. It mirrored me exactly, every breath, every movement. I screamed, but the scream was mine. Echoes layered over echoes. Nothing new, nothing real, just repetition. The yard breathed around me, pulling me toward the rails. I felt the ground tremble, heard the distant clangs of wheels I could never outrun. And as I approached, the figures of the workers began to extend, stretching unnaturally, merging into the train, their outlines blurring into steel and shadow. I understood then there was no leaving, not for anyone. The yard, the train, the shadows, they were eternal, and anyone who entered became eternal with them. I stumbled forward, unwilling, powerless. My hand brushed the rails. The pulse went through me, through my chest, my skull, my bones. And in that pulse, I felt all the contractors before me, all the workers, all the echoes, their fear, their resignation, their endless repetition. And I understood I wasn't just witnessing the yard anymore. I was becoming part of it. I tried to scream again, tried to run, tried to break the rhythm, but the rails had me. The shadows guided me. The train hummed. My body moved of its own accord, stepping closer to the mass of steel and shadow. And then the world went still. Silence, heavy, oppressive. I could hear nothing. Not the wind, not the rain, not the echoes. Just the weight of inevitability pressing down on me. And I saw it, finally, the full scale of the yard. Infinite rails stretching in every direction, each one alive, pulsing, recording, absorbing. The train never left because it couldn't. And now I understood I could never leave either. The yard didn't just claim time or space. It claimed presence, consciousness. And I was present, completely, irrevocably. I felt myself shift, my senses folding into the rhythm of the yard. My heartbeat synchronized with the pulse of the rails. My thoughts echoed in my own mind in the yard's vast network of sound. The shadows moved around me, shaping me into something unrecognizable, something cataloged, something eternal. I looked back one last time. The road I had intended to take, the path I had hoped would lead away from the yard. It had disappeared. There was nothing left but rails, shadows, and the endless hum of the train that never departs. And in that moment, I realized that for anyone who enters, for anyone who watches, for anyone who thinks they might leave, the last log is always the final one, because the yard never lets go. I sat on the rail, letting the pulse take over, letting the shadows consume the final parts of me. I understood now. I was not alone, never alone, not in the yard, not in the tracks, not in the echoes. Every contractor, every worker, every visitor who had ever stepped here was with me. And the train, that eternal, impossible machine, waited for the next. The yard had me. It always would. And anyone who thinks they can witness it and walk away, they are the next echoes. I pulled off the highway at mile marker 77, Redstone, a town marked active in the state records but otherwise invisible on modern maps. The GPS spat out a blinking, insisting I had arrived, though all I saw was cracked asphalt, rusted signs, and the faint outline of buildings swallowed by the mountains. The air was different immediately. Thicker, somehow damp, carrying a faint metallic tang. My car tires crunched over gravel that hadn't been moved in decades. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:17 p.m. The sun was low, bleeding orange across jagged peaks, and the shadows it cast didn't match the shapes around me. I felt watched, though the streets were empty. Redstone had been a mining town, once alive with the hum of industry, the clatter of carts, the shouts of men. I'd read the old reports, the legal documents that insisted people still lived there, that the town still functioned. But now it was silent, dead silent, except maybe for a faint murmur, like distant voices just beyond hearing, caught in the folds of the hills. I parked near the main street and stepped out. The wind carried a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, and my boots sank slightly into the gravel, leaving impressions that looked older than my footsteps. The buildings were intact, weathered, yes, but not collapsed. Windows stared back at me, dark and unblinking, like eyes. Each doorway yawned open, but the darkness inside wasn't the absence of light. It was more like the absence of time, of movement. I raised my camera, snapping pictures. The viewfinder reflected the streets, the buildings, the empty square. But then something odd happened. A doorway across the street seemed to shift, just barely, as though the dark space inside pulsed with anticipation. I blinked and it stopped, or maybe I imagined it. I wanted to imagine it. I walked down the main street, each step echoing too loudly, rebounding off the facade the way that felt almost deliberate. Rusted signs swung gently in the wind, though no gust touched me. A shop called Redstone Mercantile leaned slightly to the side, paint peeling, glass intact. I pressed the door, locked naturally, but the lock made a sound, a groan, a hum, a warning I couldn't place. I moved on, noting the town square, the empty post office, the firehouse. Everything was frozen in time, yet nothing matched the records I had studied. Names on old plaques, dates on the buildings. They were all off by a few years or decades. The mine shaft at the edge of town yawned dark, and the metal tracks leading to them gleamed faintly in the failing light. They shouldn't have. No trains had run here in 40 years. I set up a tripod in the square, recording audio as I spoke. Redstone, mile marker 77. Legally active, though apparently abandoned. Streets empty, buildings intact. Atmosphere heavy, strange. My voice sounded normal, but I could hear a low hum beneath it, a vibration that wasn't mine. I paused. The microphone picked up more than my words. A soft shuffle, far off, then a hollow echo. I froze, thinking it was just wind, but the wind never sounded like footsteps, like boots scraping gravel, deliberate pacing. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching unnaturally. I walked toward the old hotel. Its sign swayed, squeaking a high-pitched rhythm against the silence. Inside, the lobby smelled of dust and coal. Furniture arranged neatly, chairs tucked under tables, rugs rolled perfectly flat. No dust disturbed, no footprints. But the air felt wrong, almost viscous, pressing against me like a living thing. I could almost see it move, subtle shifts in the shadows, curling along walls, watching. I tried to leave. I swear I did, But every street looped back, every alley curved impossibly, and a highway faded into hills I swore weren't there before. The town seemed to stretch, expand when I wasn't looking. My car sat where I'd parked, but farther down the street than I remembered, as if it had moved on its own. By the time night fell, I found myself at the square again. I didn't recognize how I had arrived there. My notes were scattered on the ground, though I remembered placing them neatly in my bag. The shadows thickened. Shapes formed at the edges of my vision, fleeting, impossible to focus on. They weren't fully human, but not entirely abstract either. They lingered near the corners of buildings, appearing just long enough to suggest life, then fading into stillness. I tried the phone. No signal. Satellite GPS spun endlessly. No outside world seemed reachable. The town, or whatever it had become, was sealed from everything beyond these mountains. Panic surged, cold and creeping. My pulse spiked, but my feet moved on their own, guided by some compulsion I didn't understand. I was cataloging the town for a story, a report, but the town was cataloging me, too. I returned to the hotel, to the lobby. My camera and recorder were gone, replaced with a single ledger lying on the front desk. Dustless, pristine. I opened it. Names filled pages, dates, times, assignments, past reporters, surveyors, even state inspectors. I recognized a few. All vanished decades ago. Their names were recorded as of present, yet I knew they weren't. The ledger's pages flipped by themselves, stopping suddenly at a blank space. Empty but for one entry. Mine. Redstone mile marker 77. Arrival log. Present. Timestamp. Now. I dropped the book in shock, stepping back. The shadows shifted, converging near the doorway. I could hear them whispering, but the words weren't mine to understand. They were warnings, invitations, observations. The town had noticed me. I wanted to leave, to flee into the darkened roads. But the streets had changed again, the buildings bending subtly. Every path forward curved back. Every alley seemed to guide me to the same square, the same hotel, the same ledger. The town wasn't abandoned. It wasn't dead. It was aware, patient, and infinitely persistent. Sitting on the steps of the hotel, I tried to reason. Maybe the records were wrong. Maybe the town had been emptied long ago, and I was hallucinating fatigue. But the names, the sounds, the impossible architecture, they all insisted otherwise. Time itself felt stretched, pliable, bending around Redstone. The town existed in layers, some visible, some not, and the layers were watching me, noting my every move. Night deepened. A fog rolled in, heavy and wet, clinging to my jacket. It obscured shapes, but I knew they were there. Figures moving just beyond the mist, silent, deliberate. I could feel their attention, a cold awareness pressing against the back of my skull. I wasn't the first to arrive here. I wouldn't be the last. But unlike the others, I had recorded my presence. I had logged it, and the town would remember. I tried to sleep, sitting on the steps, but the whispers never stopped. The shuffling never ended. Every creak of timber, every rustle of leaves, every distant hum of mine shafts reminded me that the town was alive. I was not alone. I had become part of its record the moment I arrived. By dawn, I realized the truth. Redstone wasn't merely abandoned. It wasn't merely active. It existed outside normal rules, an archive of presence, memory, and attention. Every arrival was noted, every observation filed, every movement logged. And now it had logged me. I didn't know how long I had been there. Hours? Days? Perhaps it didn't matter. The town could stretch time to its will. The mountains around me didn't seem real anymore, only suggestions, boundaries for the impossible geometry of Redstone. And the shadows, they weren't human, but they were patient, watching, waiting, recording. I had arrived, and Redstone had noticed. I woke before dawn. The hotel room felt heavier than it should, the air pressing against my chest as though the walls themselves were inhaling. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nerves, fatigue, the town working its psychological tricks on a weary reporter. But then I noticed the floor. My bare feet pressed against the wood, and it was warm, not from sunlight, not from heating. I was the only one here. I stepped carefully to the doorway. The hallway beyond was dark, quiet, but not empty. The wood beneath my toes had subtle variations in warmth, as though someone or something had walked there recently. A faint impression of weight pressed into the planks. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. I shook my head. Get a grip? I whispered. The hotel was abandoned. This town was abandoned. That's what the record said. That's what logic said. And yet, the warmth underfoot said otherwise. I left the hotel. The morning fog clung low to the ground, curling around buildings like liquid smoke. The streets were still, not a single movement. But the houses, they weren't silent. Not really. I approached the first home on the block, a 2-story frame house with chipping white paint. The door hung slightly ajar. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity won. Inside, the air was denser, heavier than outside. My skin prickled. The floorboards were warm, subtly, unevenly, as if someone had paced here in the night. I ran my hand across the table. It felt clean, polished, too clean. The dust had settled everywhere else in town, but here, nothing. I began my rounds, walking street to street. Every home I entered carried the same strange warmth beneath the floors, sometimes under carpets, sometimes in empty hallways. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe heat from the sun, but the fog blocked sunlight. Maybe geothermal heat, but Redstone was not built on hot springs. There was no logical source. I pressed my hand to a banister, felt faint vibrations. Someone had been here recently. Not hours ago, minutes, maybe seconds. The impression of life lingered in the air. Subtle shifts in furniture, dust disturbed in patterns I didn't make. I thought about calling it in, reporting it as a phenomenon, but the line between reality and hallucination felt thinner in Redstone. Every step I took seemed to echo a half-second behind me, a subtle mimicry that made my skin crawl. One house, in particular, drew me in, a small single-story dwelling with a sagging roof. The door opened under my push. No resistance, no creak. Inside, the warmth was intense, pooling in certain areas of the floor. I knelt, pressing my palm against the wood. It had the heat of a recently vacated body, but no body was here. I moved through the room slowly, noting subtle pressures, depressions in the couch cushions, a rocking chair slightly tilted, as if someone had left in a hurry. Not furniture falling, not the work of ghosts. Something deliberate, alive, or at least aware. I felt it everywhere. The hair on my neck standing, the back of my eyes straining to see movement, my chest tight. I whispered to myself, trying to ground my mind. It's just residual heat. You're tired. But the feeling didn't dissipate. In the corner, a door led to a bedroom. The floorboards were warmer there, pulsing in a rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat. I froze. The room smelled faintly of cooking, or with smoke. No chimney, no fire, just a faint, impossible scent of someone living here. I dared to step closer. Each footfall met subtle resistance, almost as if the floor itself was pressing back. The pressure followed me through the room, moving in ways that didn't make sense. Chairs shifted slightly when I looked away, then snapped back into place when I turned. The warmth beneath my feet remained, stubborn, like it had been waiting for me. I left that house quickly, heart hammering. Outside, the fog had thickened. The street seemed to stretch further than I remembered. I glanced at another home, just a few steps away. Same warmth, same subtle impressions of presence. I realized then that the entire town, every building, was like this. Redstone was full of houses with floors that remembered feet, walls that remembered breathing, spaces that remembered occupancy. I tried to photograph it, to document it, but the camera refused to focus. Each shot was blurred, the images smudged, warped, as if the town itself resisted being captured. When I lifted the camera, the warmth underfoot was almost unbearable, like a warning. I was not meant to record this. I was not meant to intrude. By midday, exhaustion set in. I returned to the hotel, trying to write notes, to piece together my observations. The ledger from yesterday lay open on the desk. Names, dates, arrivals. I had written mine in already, but now, alongside my entry, faint impressions of footsteps surrounded it. Not mine, not human. Something had walked the margins of the page while I wasn't looking. I tried to leave Redstone, thinking maybe daylight would make the strangeness tolerable. But the roads twisted strangely, each turn doubling back, each street looping into itself. The town didn't allow exit. The fog thickened again. Every home I passed radiated warmth, subtle and insistent. The impression of life within them was undeniable. I was the outsider now, intruding in a space that remembered, that noticed, that waited. By evening, I returned to the hotel again. I could feel the town pulsing beneath my feet, the heat of floors extending into the walls, through the foundations, into the very air I breathed. I realized that Redstone didn't just record arrivals. It recorded presence, awareness, attention, and now it was measuring mine. I sat in the lobby, staring at the empty chairs, the cold coffee cups, the dustless surfaces. Each item was marked by a warmth that should not exist. I thought about sleeping, but the floors whispered against my body, subtly, insistently. I could feel the pressure points. Somewhere in the boards, across the joints, a rhythm like breathing, like the house itself inhaling and exhaling in sync with my pulse. Outside, fog and shadows moved together. I heard faint thuds from other rooms, the soft scuff of steps, the weight of movement in empty spaces. The town had bodies nowhere, but it had footprints, pressures, warmth. The heat beneath the floors was the imprint of life, and life, or whatever remained, was still here, still watching. I tried to close my eyes. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, but the floorboards pressed back against me as I shifted. Chairs tilted subtly. Walls creaked with impossible sounds. Hollowed voices, almost human. I could feel a pattern forming beneath the surface of everything. The town's quiet insistence that I remain, that I notice, that I acknowledge it. By nightfall, I realized that every house, every building, every floor in Redstone was alive in its own way. Not with electricity, not with plumbing, not with utility, but with memory and attention. Warmth and pressure marked the spaces where people, or something like them, had been, and now they marked me. I would have to move carefully, record everything, or risk disappearing into the layers of observation. Every footstep I took was mirrored by some unseen rhythm beneath the floors. Every breath I exhaled was measured, noted. The town waited, patient, for me to make a mistake, to stay too long, to acknowledge too deeply that it was aware of my presence. I lay down on the lobby floor, feeling the warmth beneath my back, the faint impressions of past arrivals beneath my shoulders. I felt the pulse of the boards against me, subtle but unyielding. Redstone was not just a town. It was a living record, a body without faces, breathing beneath wood and stone. And tonight, I was part of it. The radio crackled before I even turned the knobs. I didn't recognize the static at first. It wasn't the usual hiss or interference. It was layered, almost deliberate, like someone was shaking the wires inside the receiver by hand. I leaned closer, heart thudding, trying to make sense of it. "Hello," I said. My voice sounded small in the empty office, bouncing off the walls. A voice answered, not a faint whisper, not an echo, a full, clear voice, speaking like I was standing shoulder to shoulder with the speaker. "Redstone, mile marker 77. I froze. That was my location. I glanced at the radio, the dials, the channels. I had been told these frequencies had been dead for decades, sealed, decommissioned, forgotten. And yet, here it was. The voice was alive. I'm here," I whispered. My hands trembled on the knobs, twisting the volume up and down, as if that could adjust reality itself. "We work. Shift," the voice continued, rhythmic, almost chant-like. "Shift never ends." I frowned. The cadence was wrong, the phrasing stilted, almost like memory, not speech. I thought about the miners in the archives, the record that said the town's mine had collapsed in 1952, burying the crew. Everyone down there had died, all of them, and yet the voice spoke. I jotted down the transmission in my notebook, fingers trembling. The sentences repeated, looping like a recording left on loop, but with subtle differences each time. Words shifted, accents thickened and thinned, the pauses between syllables stretching unnaturally. It wasn't just a voice on a channel. It was someone or something, recreating memory through sound. I tried another frequency, another channel, more voices. Some murmured names I recognized from old census sheets. Others called out in desperation, reporting collapsed tunnels, gas leaks, machinery failures that happened decades before I was even born. One voice cracked the static and said, plainly, "Do you see us?" I slammed the notebook shut. I didn't answer. I didn't move. My throat went dry. The office air was thick, humid, like a mine shaft deep underground. Dust swirled in the weak fluorescent light. The radio hissed again, louder, angrier somehow, as if the voice were trying to force its presence into the room. They never left. You shouldn't be here. A sharp pop startled me, and suddenly the voices multiplied, overlapping. They weren't separate anymore. They were a chorus of decades of fear, confusion, and toil. I could hear boots on wood, picks striking stone, shouts muffled by rock and soil. The sound was layered with age and decay, like each note was a photograph warped by time. I felt dizzy, as though the room itself were tilting, as though the air carried the weight of collapsed tunnels. I backed away from the desk, gripping the edge. My reflection in the dark window was pale, eyes wide, sweat beating my forehead. I turned back to the radio. One voice separated itself from the noise. "Why here?" I whispered. I'm just reporting. I'm a journalist." Silence, then a hiss, a static-laden sigh, and the words came again, softer, deliberate. "Report the mine, your feet." I took a step backward. My feet throbbed against the floorboards. The warmth beneath them, the same warmth I felt in the houses earlier, pulsed in rhythm with the voices. I realized that the town itself was resonating with the memories of the miners, capturing their work, their labor, their deaths. And somehow it was still active, alive. I turned the dials again, desperate, seeking a clear signal. But all channels were alive now. Every frequency carried fragments of life. Miners laughing, arguing, calling for help, hammering into walls that no longer existed. Some of the voices spoke directly to me. I could swear they knew my name, my location, my thoughts. "Step back, you outsider." I dropped the notebook, hand shaking, and it hit the floor with a dull thump. I tried to pull away, to leave the office, but the building itself seemed to lean in, corridors stretching longer than they should, doorways bending at impossible angles. The voices followed me, echoing in every room. Each footstep was mirrored by soft tapping from an unseen source, like 1,000 picks striking stone in unison. I stumbled to the window. Outside, the fog had thickened again, twisting around the abandoned mine headframes, curling through the streets. I could see nothing of the real world, only shapes distorted by haze. But the voices persisted, more insistent. "Stay, record, listen." A particular transmission drew my attention. It was a miner's voice, older, creaking with age, but unmistakable. "Redstone, we never left. We wait, we watch, we remember." I gripped the windowsill, so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to leave, to escape, but every instinct screamed that Redstone wouldn't allow it, that whatever bound the miners' voices to the town could bind me too. I returned to the desk, trembling. The radio knobs felt impossibly warm, pulsing under my fingers as if the transmitter itself had a heartbeat. Every message I recorded carried weight, names, dates, events I knew never happened, or at least shouldn't have happened, yet the voices insisted they did, or were still happening, in a loop that time could not erase. I scribbled notes frantically, words forming incoherently, a desperate attempt to anchor reality. But the more I wrote, the louder the voices grew, each correction, each lamentation cutting sharper through the room. They corrected facts I hadn't spoken aloud, accused me of misunderstanding events, demanded I hear the truth of Redstone's past. Then came a voice I hadn't expected, soft, barely above the static, but commanding. "Record yourself, become part, or forget." I froze. The hair on my arms stood on end. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the floorboards hummed beneath my feet, warm, insistent, waiting. It wasn't just memory. The town, the archive of miners, of voices, of events, was alive, conscious in its own way, and it was aware of me. I tried to turn off the radio. Nothing. The power button clicked, the volume knob twisted, but static and voices persisted, more coherent now, repeating my actions, my thoughts, my movements. The room pulsed with rhythm, the tapping of picks, the footfalls of phantom miners, the breath of men long dead. I realized with a sickness deep in my gut that the recordings weren't simply echoes. They were demands, invitations, warnings, participation. To leave was to vanish. To ignore was impossible. The miners' voices were tethered to the town, and now, somehow, I was tethered too. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost its meaning. The chorus of miners repeated instructions, corrected my notes, whispered secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Some were terrifyingly mundane. Schedules, shifts, inventory counts. Others were harrowing. Collapses, deaths, long, slow suffocations in tunnels that didn't exist anymore, but were still alive in the frequencies. I pressed my face to the desk, listening, writing, trembling. The radio became a siren of memory, a conduit for life that never left, life that refused to fade. I could feel in the floor beneath me, in the walls, in the ceiling. The town was alive, not with people, but with the essence of people. Their voices, my voices now, recorded, corrected, observed. And then a single, chilling line cut through everything. Your shift begins now. I wanted to scream, to run, to escape Redstone, but the floors pulsed underfoot, the desk hummed, the radio crackled. I understood then. I wasn't just reporting history. I was becoming part of it. The voices of the miners had waited decades, and now they waited for me. I thought I understood Redstone. I thought I could explore it, record it, report it. But the town had other plans. The morning fog didn't lift. It thickened, curling around the streets, around the abandoned storefronts, around the cracked pavement like a living thing. I stepped out of the hotel, notebook in hand, camera dangling from my neck. My boots sank slightly into the mist, and I realized it wasn't fog. It was weight. It pressed on me, slow and deliberate, like the town itself had arms and was gripping my shoulders. I tried to walk toward the edge of the main street, toward the direction of the highway. It was only a mile or two out, but every step felt heavier, as if the town were growing underfoot. The familiar landmarks were shifting. Buildings stretched taller, their shadows leaning toward me, elongating without reason. Windows I had passed yesterday looked back at me, dark eyes staring from panes that should have been empty. I stopped in front of the general store. The door had never been locked, but today it felt sealed. I pressed my hand against it. Cold, hard, alive. There was resistance, subtle but undeniable, like the building was refusing me entry or refusing my exit. A draft whispered through the cracks around the frame. It smelled of wet earth and old smoke. And then I heard it, a soft, uneven breathing coming from somewhere inside the walls. I stepped back, heart hammering. The notebook in my hand shook. My pen rattled against its coil, writing my own name over and over in loops I hadn't intended. I didn't understand why it wrote, why the pen moved, but it did, spelling letters I didn't speak aloud. I tried the street in the opposite direction. The pavement had ripples now, like water frozen beneath my feet. Shadows moved unnaturally along the curves. I swear I could see them, tall, thin forms darting just beyond my line of vision, disappearing when I turned my head. Then I realized something worse. The street signs, the names of the avenues, the mile markers, weren't static. They shifted subtly every few seconds. I stopped to stare. Maple Avenue became Willow. Willow became Pine. The names flickered like they couldn't decide what they wanted to be. And I realized with a sinking certainty. The town wasn't fixed. It was still alive. I tried to call someone. Anyone. My phone had no signal. Not even emergency bars. The device didn't even register. My notebook glowed faintly in the fog as if drawing light from somewhere else, somewhere deeper in the ground. I flipped through it. The last entries I had written were overwritten. Names of people, dates, events I hadn't seen, hadn't heard, were now in my own handwriting. I ran. The buildings stretched and recoiled around me, forming alleys that hadn't existed before. The familiar hotel where I stayed yesterday looked different, older, more decrepit, yet somehow younger, too. Its neon sign flickered in and out, painting the fog red. I reached the doorway and tried to push through. My hands collided with the wall. Not solid, not quite air. The town resisted. I stumbled back, catching myself on a streetlight. The lamp flickered and then died. I could hear it then, the sound of breathing, not from one place, but many. The town itself inhaled and exhaled, slowly, like a living organism. I could hear the hum of its heartbeat through the cracked asphalt, in the rusted metal of the old fire hydrants, in the shutters clattering against empty window frames. I called my own name into the fog, hoping someone or something would answer, but only the town responded. The fog shifted, forming shapes. Faces pressed against windows, figures crouched in alleyways. Some raised hands, some just watched. And then the voices began, not from radios this time, not from tape machines, but from everywhere. Whispering, accusing, chanting. You stay watch, belong. I stumbled backward and fell onto the damp street. I looked up and saw the sky twisting. Not clouds, not stars, something alive above me, pulsing reflective. It mirrored the streets below. I realized a horror that the town's reflection extended upward, into the sky, into something larger, something infinite, and I was in its center. I crawled to my feet and ran. Every street I turned on to led me back to the same square, the abandoned mine office. The steps were slick with fog and something else, thin, wet residue that clung to my shoes. I glanced inside. The door stood open, though I hadn't unlocked it. Inside, my camera lay on the counter. The lens pointed directly at me, recording, but I hadn't set it there. I picked it up, pressed play. The screen showed me running. But behind me, on the street in the reflection, figures moved. Shapes that should not have been there. A miner in a helmet, pick in hand. Staring at me, a woman in old-fashioned clothes. Long hair plastered to her face. Stepping through walls. All the movements perfectly synchronized with mine, yet slightly delayed, like echoes caught in slow motion. I threw the camera down. The screen shattered. The echoes kept moving. I could hear them everywhere now. Inside my ears in the fog, beneath my feet. I realized that the town didn't just record the past. It recreated it. It pulled memory into itself, replaying it, living it, twisting it. And now it had me. I tried the highway again. I ran, fog swirling around my knees, buildings leaning in to block me, stretching higher than they could possibly be. Every step forward felt like walking through syrup. I glanced behind me and saw the streets lengthening endlessly, twisting back into themselves. I was trapped. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps. I tried to speak, to call for help, but the words caught in my throat. The notebook on the ground flared faintly again, and I could read new entries, written in my own handwriting. Yet I had never written them. Cannot leave. Belongs. Record. Report. Stay. I screamed. The fog carried it back to me, warped and amplified. The building shook lightly, like muscles flexing, pushing against the sky. I stumbled into the square again. The mine office door slammed behind me. Every window glowed faintly, reflecting me. But the reflections weren't mine. They moved independently, gesturing, smiling, gesturing for me to come closer. A sudden warmth rose from the asphalt. Footsteps, not mine, something following me, but it matched the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I turned. Nothing, yet I felt it. Always behind, always waiting, always watching. I sat down in the street. My hands shook violently. The fog swirled closer. I realized the town wasn't just alive. It was conscious, sentient. It wasn't going to let me leave. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I was part of its history now, like the miners, like the people whose names were written in fading ledgers. I whispered into the fog, I don't belong here. I can leave. The town responded immediately. Windows banged. Doors creaked. The pavement beneath me pulsed again. The fog thickened. A voice, soft and layered, came from everywhere. You belong, record, belong, stay. I shivered uncontrollably. The buildings leaned closer. The streets twisted again. The fog pressed against my skin, thick and wet. I could feel my own heartbeat syncing with it, pulsing with the rhythm of the town's breath. I realized then that I would never leave Redstone. Not fully, not alive. The town would take my reports, my recordings, my words, my movements, and fold them into its streets, its buildings, its fog. I would be part of it. Just another echo, another loop, another presence that watched and waited. I tried to run one last time, but the street ended in front of me, impossibly narrow, stretching into the darkness. I stepped forward, and the pavement absorbed me, not like water, not like mud, but like the town itself was swallowing me into its memory. I stumbled, fell, and the fog rose to cover me completely. Somewhere above, the sky pulsed, reflecting the streets below. I realized that the town didn't want to trap me in walls or doors. It wanted me as part of its essence. My eyes burned, my hands shook, my voice caught in my throat, and I understood Redstone is alive, and it always has been. Status, unknown. I arrived in Millhaven with a notebook, a clipboard, and a sense of duty I now wish I had left at the office. Officially, it was just another census assignment. A small town in the middle of nowhere, supposedly thriving, supposedly active. But the moment I crossed the cracked welcome sign, I felt wrong. The streets were empty, not just quiet. Empty. Mailboxes stood upright. Doors hung slightly ajar. Lights reflected in the windows, as if someone had been home yesterday. But no one was there. My boots crunched on gravel. Every sound echoed unnaturally, like the town had swallowed a breath and was holding it. I started with the records. The list of residents had names, dates of birth, families, even occupations. Smith, Carter, Johnson, ordinary names. I was trained to check their physical presence, door to door, verify addresses. First house, number 3, the Wilsons. Knocked, no answer. I called out, no answer. Peeked through the curtains. Empty, yet the census form said, occupied, 3 members present. I shook it off. Maybe the Wilsons were at work. The Carters? Empty. The Johnsons? Empty. Every single home I checked. Empty. No footprints. No signs of movement. No faint smell of dinner cooking. Just nothing. But the records insisted they were there. I noted it down, confusion pressing against my ribs. By noon, the sun had disappeared behind clouds I hadn't noticed arriving. A gray suffocation over the town. I approached the town hall, thinking maybe there was some explanation, someone to answer questions. The building loomed, old brick and rotting timbers. Inside, the hall was empty. Paper stacks lined the counters, forms neatly filed, yet the air smelled stale, like old breath trapped behind glass. I found a ledger open, one of the census ledgers. Names, dates, addresses. I ran a finger down the list. Half the names I'd knocked on, half I hadn't. I called them aloud, softly, hesitantly. No sound returned except the echo of my own voice. And then I noticed something chilling. Besides some of the names, someone had written a note in faded ink. Not here. Cannot be found. Exists only in paper. Do not disturb. I froze. I didn't know whether to be horrified or absurdly amused. I spoke to no one. No one spoke back. The handwriting was older than the building, older than the town, older than me, and yet it had been updated. Some notes were fresh, weighing smudged in tiny, nervous streaks. I moved through the streets as the fog rolled in, thickening with each block. It was too uniform, too quiet. My eyes scanned the empty homes. A rocking chair swayed on the porch of one house, though no wind moved it. I took a step closer. Nothing. The motion stopped as if it had never moved. I tried calling the town office from my cell phone. Nothing. Not a single bar. The radio in my truck. Static. I opened the door and stepped back, half expecting someone to materialize in the fog. The air was heavy. My breath formed clouds I hadn't noticed before. I could feel eyes on me, though I knew no one was there. I returned to the ledger. More notes appeared as I stared. One has arrived. Another will join soon. The words weren't printed. They weren't typed. They had appeared as I watched. My hand hovered over the page. Trembling. I didn't write them. I didn't see anyone write them. Yet they were there. I wandered to the edge of town, the old cemetery. Gravestones cracked and weathered, dates stretching back a century. I found names from the census ledger, etched in stone, long dead by any account. The very people I was supposed to find, to count. Some had been gone for decades. Some had never been alive. I backed away. My notebook rattled on the passenger seat, like it wanted me to open it. I did. Notes from my own hand. Ones I didn't remember writing. Detailed encounters I hadn't had. Houses I hadn't visited. Names I hadn't called. Yet the ledger insisted. Complete. Verified. I drove slowly through town, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles bled. The fog thickened, rising in the rearview mirror, curling around the truck like fingers. I saw movement in the streets behind me. Shadows, human-shaped but wrong, swaying unnaturally. When I looked directly, they vanished. When I looked away, they reappeared. The houses themselves seemed aware. Windows shifted ever so slightly, as if watching. Porches tilted, doors creaked, roofs groaned. I realized I wasn't just alone in town. I was being observed. The ledger had brought me here. It had known I would come. Night fell, quicker than it should have. The fog was now a wall, thick as cement. I tried to leave. The roads twisted, unfamiliar. Street signs I had passed earlier changed names. Familiar turns led me back to the town square. The town wasn't static. It was alive. In the center of the square, a figure stood. No features, just a human shape. I froze. The figure didn't move. I called out. It didn't respond. I stepped closer. And then in the fog, dozens more appeared, silent, still, watching me. Shapes from the ledger, from the gravestones, from the census forms. People who never were. People who were now waiting. I stumbled backward. My own notebook flipped open. Pages turning furiously, writing by themselves. Do not leave. Count. Join. Stay. The words were in my hand now. I couldn't drop it. The pen scratched across the paper on its own, forming names I recognized. My own name appeared at the bottom, alongside dates and a notation. Confirmed. Added to population. I screamed. The fog swallowed it. The figures pressed closer. I tried to run, but the streets curved endlessly. Each step forward brought me back to the center square. The houses leaned in, whispering my name, sighing as if relieved. The town itself had claimed me. I tried the cemetery again, thinking maybe it was a path out. Gravestones shifted. Names I had read yesterday dissolved into soil, and new names appeared. I realized the town was rearranging history, rewriting the dead to accommodate the ledger, to accommodate me. I understood then I was counted. I had become part of the barred population. Not alive, not dead, not quite human anymore. Just another entry in the ledger. And the town watched, patient, eternal. I do not know if anyone will ever find this report. If anyone is reading it, know this. The people of Millhaven exist only on paper. The homes are empty. The streets move. The town breathes. And the ledger waits, waiting for the next census worker, the next visitor, the next curious soul who believes they can document the living. I am counted. I am listed. And if you come, you will be too. I woke before dawn. The fog still thick over Millhaven like a wet blanket pressed to my chest. My truck sat where I left it. But the town had changed overnight. Houses I'd passed yesterday now leaned slightly toward the street, as if straining to see me. Windows that had been dull and dusty now reflected light that shouldn't exist this early, and I could swear the door frames had grown darker, almost breathing. I tried to shake it off as exhaustion. Months on the road had made me sensitive to empty towns. Quiet places always played tricks on the mind. But this felt different. Personal. Intentional. I started my rounds, clipboard in hand, notebooks ready. Tried to ignore the sensation that the buildings themselves were alive. The first house I approached, number 7 on Hawthorne Street, had a front door with peeling green paint. I swore it twisted slightly as I stepped onto the porch, aligning itself to my path. Hello? My voice sounded strange in the fog. Thinner, as if it were being sucked away before reaching the air. No answer. Only the soft groan was settling. or perhaps moving of its own will. I knocked. 3 sharp raps. The door didn't open, didn't even twitch, but I could feel it watching me. The grain was pulsing under my knuckles, warm, alive, judging. I stepped back. The next house wasn't any better. Number 9, a brick bungalow, had a window that reflected me perfectly, but as I walked past it, my reflection stayed behind. I turned back. Nothing. The glass was still cold normal, or as normal as this town allowed, but my mind refused to accept it. How could reflection remain? I checked the backyards, the alleys. Every house along the street seemed awake, doors and windows swiveling toward me, leaning ever so slightly, like heads on a dozen unseen necks. I caught glimpses of shapes, shadows that didn't belong to me, flitting behind curtains or crouched just beyond a doorway. Every time I blinked, they vanished, leaving only the oppressive sense that I wasn't supposed to be here. By mid-morning, I was sweating despite the chill. I went inside one of the abandoned shops downtown, hoping for a reprieve, some static place I could gather my thoughts. The door closed behind me with a soft click. I froze. The door hadn't just closed. It had shifted in its frame, sliding imperceptibly, aligning itself to me, like it knew where I was, where I would move. I walked to the counter. My boots echoed. The echo returned to me twice over. Too many echoes. And then a whisper. Not human. Not words I could understand. Just a vibration. A hiss of air. I spun. Empty store. Dust motes drifted in shafts of pale light. My heart raced. I tried to convince myself it was the wind. But the wind couldn't explain the feeling that the shelves were leaning toward me, that the counter was pressing slightly against my chest, that the walls were bending in just enough to make me feel trapped. I bolted outside. The street seemed longer than before, houses stretching taller, windows multiplying. I glanced at the windows of number 7 again. One pane rippled as if I had just disturbed water. My reflection shimmered, and behind it, something moved. A dark shape, barely visible, standing too still to be human. I ran. I ran from street to street, clutching my clipboard, trying to reach the town hall. The building seemed to shift in response, closing gaps, opening alleys that led nowhere, doors that were just doors one moment and walls the next. At the hall, I opened the ledger again. I had no choice. The pages were filled with names. Names of residents I could no longer verify. Some entries were new, written in hurried scrawls. She watches. He waits. The town knows. I felt in the bones of the building, the wooden floors beneath my feet vibrating slightly, like a heartbeat. I left the hall and returned to the street. The houses leaned more aggressively now. Shadows gathered in corners, impossible angles behind doors. Windows aligning perfectly with my line of sight. I could feel eyes, dozens, hundreds, silent and intent. I tried to knock, to speak, to interact with the house like it was human, but the doors didn't respond. Instead, the air thickened, pressing down like the town itself disapproved of my curiosity. I could feel the pulse of the buildings, a slow, deliberate rhythm that matched my own rising panic. I backed away slowly. A front door in the fog ahead swiveled with me, not moving mechanically, but consciously, as if it were alive, choosing to mirror me, track me. I ran, turned a corner. Another house shifted its roof slightly to block the morning light. I realized then, the town itself wasn't abandoned. It was aware. I was an intruder, and every surface, every wall, every door and window was watching, learning, adjusting. By afternoon, exhaustion and fear combined into a dull, numbing ache. I had to keep moving, or I would be swallowed entirely. I tried to document the experience, to write it down as a log, but my pen trembled in my hand. The words on the page shifted as I wrote. Names became numbers, streets became rivers, doors became faces. I stopped, closed the notebook. The town exhaled in response. I could feel it. Houses leaned in. Windows pressed shadows against me. Doors moved without wind. I tried to step past one, and the door creaked open just enough to force me sideways. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't mechanical. It was willful. It wanted me to move, or to stop, or to look. I couldn't tell which. Even the alleyways betrayed me. They stretched, narrowed, twisted. I found myself standing in front of the same house 3 times in 10 minutes. I could hear the floorboard sigh in a pattern. Not human, not animal, something else. I understood then. I was not exploring Millhaven. Millhaven was exploring me. Every door, every window, every creaking shutter was mapping my reactions, testing me. I realized some of the names in the ledger had vanished, replaced by my own, and maybe, in the town's eyes, I had already been counted. Even now, as I try to write this, I feel the walls around me pulse. The window in my room leans in. The door tilts slightly as I type. The fog outside crawls along the streets, the houses pressing toward me, moving as one entity, aware, alive. I know I cannot leave. The doors, the windows, they will not allow it. And I will not be alone. Someone or something is already waiting behind every door, watching, learning. I catch glimpses of shadow in each pane of glass, each polished handle. And every time I do, I hear it. A quiet, deliberate murmur, almost imperceptible, like the town itself is breathing my name. I am documenting it, yes, but I am also becoming part of it. And soon, I suspect, I will be watched as closely as I am watching. The doors of Millhaven are patient. They are quiet, but they will not forget. I didn't sleep that night. The fog clung to Millhaven so tightly it felt like it was pressing me into my own bed. The ledger lay open on my lap, names staring up at me like they had been expecting me. I thought I understood the town when I arrived. Empty streets, abandoned houses. It seemed harmless, almost dull. But now I could feel it. In every floorboard, every warped doorframe. The census wasn't just a tally. It was an invitation, a trap, and a trap that had already sprung. I forced myself out of bed and walked to the hall. The walls leaned in, stretching a way that made the corridor feel narrower than before. Shadows clung in corners. Following me, I tried to shake it off. I was a worker. I had a job to finish. Counting names, verifying details, logging residents. That's what I thought I could handle. But when I opened the ledger, I froze. New entries had appeared overnight. Names I didn't recognize, addresses that didn't exist. Some pages were scribbled so hastily the ink bled into itself, forming patterns that almost looked like faces. I leaned closer, and the room seemed to exhale. My breath fogged the page, and when I pulled back, the ink had shifted. One name, my name, had appeared in neat, precise handwriting I didn't recognize, but I had never written it. I felt the walls pulse. They weren't walls anymore. They were lungs, breathing in the space around me, pressing me closer to the ledger. I ran my fingers over the page. The names trembled. One of them, M. Reddington, blurred into a new name, M. Reddington, then vanished entirely. I blinked, and there it was again, slightly different, listed under a street that had never existed on any map I'd seen. Something clicked in my chest. This wasn't about counting names. The town wasn't collecting statistics. It was absorbing. People didn't leave Millhaven once their names were written. And now, it seemed I was part of the process. I backed away from the ledger, but the room wasn't as empty as it had been. Shadows curled along the edges of the walls, moving toward me in slow, deliberate arcs. The floorboards creaked beneath the weight of someone or something that wasn't there. I tried to leave. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. It stretched impossibly long. Each step forward brought the walls closer, making me feel like I was being funneled through a living corridor. Doors along the hallway leaned forward, windows dark with anticipation. I could hear whispers, not human voices, not coherent speech, just fragments, half sounds, hints of syllables. Count, add, join. They seeped into my skull, cold and soft, like icy water trickling into my ears. I ran to a window and tried to look outside. Fog covered everything, but through the mist, I could see the houses on the street. They were shifting subtly, as if they were turning themselves to watch me. I swear one of them leaned in, stretching its roof like a neck, peering at me with darkened pains. I stumbled back, clutching the ledger. I had to document it, had to prove it somehow. But as I opened the next page, it wasn't blank. It was already filled with new entries. And the names looked familiar. They were the faces I'd seen yesterday. Faces of townsfolk who didn't exist. Faces of shadows and windows. Faces of people the census said were alive, but in reality had never lived. A thought struck me like ice in my veins. The census wasn't just recording people. It was creating them. Or maybe it was pulling them from somewhere else. Someplace beyond understanding. Into this town that wasn't supposed to exist. I tried to leave the hall again. Every door I approached shifted subtly, sliding away, shrinking just enough to block me. Windows warped, reflecting me back in strange angles. My body stretched or compressed unnaturally. I turned, and the hallway behind me had lengthened again. I was trapped. The town had begun counting me, adding me, absorbing me. The whispers grew louder, not one voice, but dozens layered over each other, murmuring, chattering, almost conversational. Name, tally yours now. The ledger on my lap began to glow faintly. The ink bubbled, forming a new name in perfect, tiny handwriting. My name. I hadn't written it. I hadn't even touched the pen. I dropped the book in horror. It hit the floor, and when it landed, the pages flipped rapidly on their own, stopping at an entry I couldn't recognize. It was a face. My face. Sketches of my own features sprawled across the page, drawn in meticulous detail, with my eyes hollow, staring back at me. I tried to back away, but the hall wasn't empty. Shadows bunched together along the edges, forming vague, humanoid shapes. They didn't move like people. They glided, stretched, warped, but I could see their faces. They were smiling, and they were waiting. One of the forms drifted closer, tilting its head like a door swinging on invisible hinges. It whispered my name. I felt it press against the base of my skull, and for a moment, I could see everything. The ledger had all the names. Everyone ever counted. Every name absorbed. Every person added. Their lives, their faces, their histories, all etched into this living record. And I understood then I was next. I ran down the corridor, but the hallways kept stretching, twisting. Every time I turned a corner, another shadow joined the wall. Another whisper added to the chorus. I stumbled into a room I didn't recognize. Rows of empty chairs faced the ledger at the far end. I could feel hundreds of eyes, no, thousands, pressing against me from the walls, the windows, the ceiling. The ledger floated from the floor to the table. Pages turned to my entry. I could see my life compress into ink. My movements, my fears. The exact moment I had stepped into Millhaven. I reached out to touch it, and the whispering crescendoed into a roar of soundless voices. The room shifted violently. I fell back. The ledger landed open on my chest. I felt something brush against my skin. Cold, wet, impossibly heavy. The ink on the page began to crawl across my arms, my neck, seeping into me. Not burning, not cutting, but filling, marking, claiming. I struggled, trying to pull away. But the room, no, the town, was stronger. The walls leaned closer. Windows pressed panes against my shoulders, and the shadows pressed tighter. I felt myself stretching, twisting, folding into the shape of the ledger, my consciousness splitting into lines of ink, into letters and numbers. My name was written in the ledger, and now I was written in the town. I could still see through my own eyes, still feel the panic of my body that no longer existed. The shadows gathered around the hall, whispering secrets of people long absorbed, long forgotten. They murmured encouragement, not cruelty, just inevitability. I understood, finally, the census didn't just track people, it created them. It maintained them. It absorbed the living into the ledger, into Millhaven, where the town itself lived, breathed, and cataloged existence. I was not a worker. I was a participant, a new entry, and the town would not stop. Even now, as I whisper these words into the recorder, I can feel the pages turning. Names blur and shift around mine. I see shadows peering over my shoulder, windows leaning in, doors creaking in slow, deliberate arcs. Millhaven is patient. Millhaven is precise. And Millhaven always finishes its tally. I am the latest. The ledger holds me. The town watches me. The counting never ends. I am part of it now, and there is no leaving.